The peaceful world was suddenly threatened by a crazed undead creature endangering human lives. These hideous zombies were summoned by the ultimate boss, the corpse god. The zombies were so numerous that they spilled out of the cave. The kingdom was forced to send knights to punish the final boss. Unfortunately, they were too weak. They couldn't even touch a single hair of the corpse god. The corpse god hadn't even fought too aggressively, yet some people had already lost arms and legs. Several even ended up with knives in their stomachs, dying on the spot. To destroy the corpse god, the church had to send their trump card. Sagwa arrived with a majestic presence. As soon as the corpse god saw the hero, he shot deadly beams straight at him. Sagwa easily deflected the attack and used his acceleration magic to approach the giant skeleton. Both sides began fighting fiercely. The first blows directly attacked the opponent. The hero's powerful slashes were blocked by the corpse god, who returned several hits to him. While fighting the hero, the corpse god summoned souls from across the continent to his soul orb. Then he summoned an undead dragon that flew straight at Sagwa, but the dragon only gave the hero a bit of trouble before he cut it in two. While Sagwa was in a life or death battle with the skeleton boss, his teammates just sat watching. They even asked each other if he would be defeated by the corpse god. The final boss was constantly pushed back by the hero, so it summoned an army of skeletons to fight Sagwa in this desperate situation. But the hero's teammates still decided to put their faith in him rather than help. The hero's past flashed back to when he was a child whose loved ones were taken by a madman. Fortunately, Sagwa was saved by knights. From then on, he dedicated himself to the church. He possessed something special called the demon eye, which allowed him to see souls since childhood. Most people with this eye hide in the church until the end of their lives. Others, like the corpse god, chose to use their power to toy with the souls of the unfortunate. Only Sagwa chose to stand up and fight for humanity. Back to the battle, Sagwa didn't want to waste time defeating the countless skeletons. He shot a fireball at the cave ceiling, causing rocks to fall directly on the final boss. After being repeatedly repelled, Sagwa finally discovered his enemy's true form. It was a brain kept in a cage protected inside the giant skeleton, despite both having the same demon eyes. But Sagwa's view on death was opposite to the corpse god's. To the corpse god, others' souls were merely toys for entertainment. Both launched their final attacks. The dry skeleton summoned a technique with strange patterns that the hero had never seen before. But to protect the country and the future of the children, he had to use his ultimate technique to pierce through that magic. After the fierce battle between the two strongest forces in the kingdom, a young man woke up in an alley, not knowing where he was. On his neck was a bloody wound. The young man was confused when he saw a splendid, magnificent city before him. A young man from the corpse cleanup crew couldn't believe his eyes because the boy was still alive. He reported to his teammates that they didn't need to come because the assassin had lost all credibility. The reincarnated young man was still trying to understand the strange things around him. From alien languages to screens that displayed images without magic, everything was strange, but what interested him most was the peacefulness of this world and the bright smiles of the children. That was what he had wished for most in his old world. While thinking, two police officers approached to ask about his condition. His brain had just finished loading his memories, so he gradually understood what they were saying. He also remembered that his name in this world was Shino Yamashino. The policemen were about to call an ambulance to treat the wound on his neck when a girl suddenly kicked one officer in the head and quickly carried Shino away. A black man and a handsome guy noticed the incident but didn't intervene. The girl led the boy to a deserted alley and introduced herself as Misaki. A fragment of memory rushed back, making Shino think Misaki was his friend here. Misaki confusedly affirmed that her friend wasn't dead yet. His face, when pressed against her chest, still had warmth. To celebrate that the young man was still alive, Misaki decided to use the same blade she had cut his neck with earlier to do it again. Now Shino's memory was clearer, so he quickly fled to avoid being killed again by this crazy girl. Shino had escaped to a corner to think about what to do next. Here, he couldn't use magic. If he took another fatal blow, he might never wake up again. Just as Misaki found his hiding place, he had to jump away. Her knives flew toward him, but that only excited Misaki more. Shino's body couldn't keep up. With his existing reflexes, defending was somewhat difficult. This was the world he had always wished to live in, so the reincarnated young man couldn't die yet. Now once again, Shino tried to escape, but this time he had a knife stuck in his thigh. With all his will to live, he pulled the knife from his leg, threw it straight at Misaki, and ran away. for an experienced assassin like her. This was the first time she'd encountered such a formidable prey. Shino entered a room full of bloodstains left from before, and the crazy killer followed right behind, stabbing another knife into his leg, causing him to fall to the ground. Misaki introduced this room as a place where horrific experiments were performed on people, so it was called the execution area. Because of this, rumors about restless ghosts made people afraid to come near. Right here, Shino's demon eye was activated. He understood everything about the atrocities committed here. The demon eye was something bound to his soul, so no matter where he went, it would follow him. Hearing the way Misaki talked about life was irritating, so the reincarnated young man summoned a demon arm and gave her a hole right in the stomach. But even the corpse god didn't expect that people in this world were so easy to kill. He was chilled when the assassin who had just been threatening him truly could not get up to fight back anymore. The past of the one the world saw as a calamity began when he was born with demon eyes. His family considered it bad luck and sold him to the kingdom's sorcerers. He became a soul-summoning mage, threw himself into countless battles, and was worn to the bone. Only when the kingdom was destroyed did he gain freedom. Tired of meaningless wars, he hid in the forest to live peacefully alone. A few children and a girl still accepted the corpse god's frightening appearance. Just as feelings between the human and the dry skeleton began to form, the world called him to be a murderer again. The church didn't ask for help, but labeled the children living with him as disease carriers and took them all away. Having lost everything, he became an outcast, carrying hatred for hundreds of years. The labyrinth where he hid was affected by his power, accidentally turning into a sea of the undead. One thing the corpse god had always wished for was a peaceful life. Having struggled so hard to get a chance to start over, he couldn't let himself be killed senselessly in the new world. And the corpse god never expected that people in this world would be so weak. Why didn't this crazy girl bring medicine or healing magic? Now, how could he explain to the police that he was the victim when he had just given his enemy a hole in the stomach? At this moment, he still hadn't realized he was being watched. The person who had been following the corpse god since he arrived here thought he was hallucinating. He had just reported to boss Kajisa and sent her a video clip of this incident. Misaki, when she was an innocent child, was sheltered by a warm family. Then one fine day, an assassin appeared out of nowhere and gave her parents dozens of holes in their bodies. After psychological trauma, Misaki became the crazy person she is now and found the assassin from years ago. With protection from boss Kajisa, she had the right to torture the murderer to teach him what pain is. While talking, Misaki hammered several nails into the assassin's body. The pain and Misaki's brainless questioning gradually made the assassin lose consciousness. Misaki gave him another chance to remake his life on the condition that he rate his own morality. The assassin hadn't even opened his mouth before receiving a club straight to the face. Since then, Misaki had always eliminated her assigned targets with a terrifying smile that made some professionals in the field a bit scared. After avenging her family, boss Kajisa gave her a new mission. This time the target was a young boy, and Misaki wanted to check if she still had humanity. The result was that Misaki still acted as decisively as usual. She felt that if she continued to exist, someday she would betray the organization. Misaki decided to commit suicide, but a phone call made her temporarily postpone the plan. Takumi called not to prevent Misaki from doing something foolish, but to inform her that the target was still alive. The victim of Misaki's execution was wandering the streets as if nothing had happened. Because of this, she had to continue serving the organization, only to ultimately receive a skewer from some bony hands. Misaki slowly opened her eyes but realized she hadn't turned into a ghost. The corpse god, following Takumi's guidance, had successfully resurrected this crazy battle-hungry assassin. She didn't believe it, so she checked her own soul. It was all thanks to Shino's magic. Kajisa ran over to hug Misaki and let her know that she had truly died. She was now just a zombie. Takumi would report the situation to everyone. He was an information trader whose side job was helping assassins clean up crime scenes after hunts. But he never expected that at his age, he would encounter such a strange case. Not long ago, Kajisa had gathered the whole team to inquire about the boy who had just killed her subordinate. She also asked about Takumi's condition, but after witnessing everything, he was even more confused than her. The corpse god had tried to fix the hole in Misaki's stomach in front of Kajisa and her trusted subordinates. Everyone still couldn't believe these high-level magic tricks. When the corpse god said he needed more mages to perform some kind of resurrection magic, Kajisa's group didn't understand what he was talking about. Only now did the corpse god realize that the world he had reincarnated into didn't have these concepts. Or if they did, they were only in games, so the reincarnated young man was the first to know how to use magic. He briefly explained his magic. Of course, an experienced person like Kajisa wouldn't be easily fooled by such nonsense. The corpse god had to use a bone hand to pin a bald man to the ground as a threat. This forced Kajisa to request time to discuss what to do with this sorcerer. Both sides were at a standstill when Takumi suddenly showed the boss news about a recent fire. As soon as he heard it involved children, the corpse god sent an eye to spy. Although the eye was immediately cut in half by Kajisa's subordinate, the corpse god didn't want to harm them because he was only curious about the fate of the children in the fire. They were all orphans whose families were connected to the underworld, so most had similar fates. Upon hearing this, the corpse god recalled his past and wanted to save the unfortunate children. Kajisa tested his intentions by assigning Takumi to supervise. The corpse god's movement looked like a glitching Spider-Man. Upon arrival, he opened his demon eye to check if the children had died yet. Then the corpse god used a hand to throw himself into the fire as casually as walking through a shopping mall. Takumi's face turned pale, his blood pressure dropping because he feared the press might capture this scene and publish sensational headlines. In the sea of flames, the children's parents' souls still stood beside them, trying to protect their children. The protagonist summoned a group of skeletons for them to possess so they could carry their children out. For a brief moment, the children felt the final warmth of their parents. When finished, the corpse god created another invisible hand, carrying all the children and dropping them off for the rescue team. The mission was complete, but internet users with quick hands had already taken pictures and posted them online. Takumi still didn't understand what this guy thought about life. Afterward, Misaki woke up and returned to her main profession, comedy. The corpse god shared his feelings with Kajisa. First, to live peacefully, he needed money. Next, his unique abilities were strange here, so Kajisa quickly recruited the protagonist by offering a combo of assistants, including the battle-crazy Misaki and Takumi to complete the set. The life of a neat and two psychologically troubled individuals began. Takumi was worried about whether the psychologically unstable girl could live with the person who had killed her. Of course, besides excitement, Misaki didn't have many issues. The entire building where the three of them lived was owned by Kajisa. With the corpse gods appearing and disappearing tricks, Takumi was truly worried about whether one day he might get skewered. The corpse god had made up excuses to Shino's family to cover for his absence from home. Shino's family only knew that he was traveling, and their son sent postcards every month. The corpse god was researching the new world he had reincarnated into. Everything seemed different, like whales here being legendary magical beasts in the old world. Was the religious order that used to knock on his door with swords when he was still a giant skeleton here too? Back then, he was bothered by fanatics wanting to fight him every day. Takumi wondered what Shino's nickname was in the old world. As soon as she heard the name, the corpse god, Misaki's eyes lit up because of how cool it sounded. To achieve a peaceful life as in legends, first, the corpse god had to escape the fate of being a poor soul. Next, he had to persuade the person who commissioned the killing of this body's original owner. To protect client information, Kajisa couldn't reveal that person's identity to him. But the fun-loving boss had promised not to accept any more commissions related to assassinating this body. The corpse god could relax and have fun. Personally, Takumi also thought no one would be crazy enough to mess with the corpse god. But currently, what worried him more was that the psycho who had killed the real Shino was living in the same house with them. Fortunately, the real Shino's soul had generously agreed to forgive Misaki. Thanks to the corpse god's intervention, the soul of the unfortunate boy was now in Takumi's drone. That was also why he couldn't control it anymore. But what made him shudder was the corpse god's view that human lives were like toys. That view made Takumi still very cautious of this bland kid. Just when they needed money to escape poverty, a client came to ask Misaki to protect him from foreign assassins. She was about to refuse so she could play with the bone arms. But the corpse god appeared out of nowhere and accepted the commission on her behalf. This time Misaki had to agree to participate. The content of the commission was to deal with the assassins who wanted to kill the client. They were all in the same gang as the cold-blooded assassin Rima, who had just been made to swallow an iron bar by Misaki for poor moral points. This gang worked very cruelly because they usually killed the victim's entire family at once. Following Takumi's information, they all went to the hideout. Misaki remembered the man who had harmed her parents, so she was a bit angry. She rushed into the enemy's nest like a car with no brakes, but somehow the enemy had been waiting there to ambush them. 2 or 3 guys carrying iron rods came out swinging continuously at Misaki. She gave one a kick that bruised one of his eyes. The second was also kicked in the face and fell down, causing the rest to trample over each other as they ran. The guy with one bruised eye had just regained consciousness when Misaki kicked him again, bruising his other eye. Although a bit perverse, Misaki's strength was formidable. While she was distracted, they played dirty and shot through her. The one who shot her was the uncle who had given them the commission. It turned out this uncle was in the same gang as Rimba, who had been killed by Misaki a few days ago. At this moment, the corpse god with his demon eye finally showed his face, and he would finish the task he had accepted. The black-coated uncle held a gun to the corpse god's face, but he didn't expect that assassin Misaki was still alive. Grinning, she was testing her new powers from her immortal body. Now not only could bullets not bring her down, but her strength was also greater than bodybuilder monsters. Online, Takumi called the corpse god to ask why he knew that the man was the real murderer. It was all thanks to the corpse god's demon eyes that helped him see the children harmed by this man. The commission the corpse god accepted was actually from the unfortunate children, not from that evil man. It was time for the protagonist to teach these murderers how to appreciate the future seedlings of the country. A giant hand emerged from the ground, crushing the entire gang of murderers and gathering them into a ball. After completing the task, the corpse god refused to accept payment from the children because he took this case partly to vent his anger on the bad guys. Returning home, the corpse god got to see Misaki's pure white soul while she was checking her newly upgraded body. The corpse god was a bit shocked about how aggressive girls in this world were. Takumi still wanted to understand more about the protagonist's definition of viewing people as toys, so he asked directly. For him, toys were things that helped children be happy, so he greatly valued others' lives. In general, this guy was just an eccentric who couldn't be reasoned with. Takumi reported back to boss Kajisa. She had promised not to accept commissions to kill the corpse god anymore. Those who had just given the commission to harm Misaki were probably about to face consequences. They were being hunted, and the leader mentioned the name Lemon before dying. The corpse god was still on his journey to reintegrate into society, and Misaki had just learned that she could evolve. It seemed like everything around the corpse god was like a game. Kajisa was stark naked, chatting with her 2 subordinates. The corpse god called again, but Takumi officially cut ties. Because of this case, Misaki had become a zombie but still retained her sanity. Takumi guessed that the city would soon be in chaos. At a bar, a blonde young man was waiting for Takumi to arrive. While chatting with the bartender, he accidentally brushed the waitress's butt and was grabbed by the head by the bouncer, dangling like a piece of beef in the market. The corpse god at home was revealing information about Misaki's undead body. Now she could eat meat to heal wounds and could paralyze opponents with a bite containing numbing saliva. As soon as she heard this, Misaki immediately tested it on the corpse god. She also begged Takumi to let her bite him. The corpse god was still unconscious in a corner, while imagining the monsters here and the monsters in the old world. If we talked about real monsters in this world, perhaps we should name the bandaged youth Lemon. Lemon was standing at the scene where the corpse god had balled up all those criminals. This place had attracted police patrol because of the gunshots. Before the police discovered it, Lemon had removed the earth ball created by the corpse god, revealing a group of people knotted together. After the case was discovered, police from Team 3 were called to the scene, including the sex-crazed brother who was drunk at the bar and the young man Ares who was using his head to bash some scammers at the bar to death. To avoid killing anyone again, this time the corpse god had been careful and moderate. Iwanome and Ares had now arrived at the crime scene. This was the first time they had seen human bodies knotted together. For supernatural phenomena like this, no wonder they called their team. Iwanome and Ares were both from the 3rd data editing team, with Iwanome as the team leader. Their team specialized in handling supernatural cases that humans couldn't explain, from Lemon the Reaper to the fire-spitting bug. Since their appearance, disasters had also appeared one after another, keeping the police extremely busy. At the Shinuya police station, the special forces were meeting about the mysterious cases that had occurred recently. Their job was to keep these secrets and quietly arrest each culprit. The most dangerous subjects currently were the Reaper, the fire-spitting bug, and Lemon. Besides, there was a rising star, which was the dry bones of the reincarnated young man, the corpse god. Lemon's traces at the scene related to the corpse god made the group even more confused. The criterion of the third data editing team was to expose those who claimed to know magic. For them, as long as they were flesh and blood humans, they could still handle them. The protagonist at the base had also successfully transferred Shino's real soul into a stuffed shark. Takumi was overjoyed to get back his beloved drone. Shino felt happier because since using the concealment technique on the drone, or now the stuffed shark, he always had his face pressed against paradise. Making Shino able to speak wasn't difficult for the protagonist. He just needed to ask for someone's vocal cords. Then he could use magic to help the owner speak again. But doing that consumed a lot of magic. First, the corpse god needed to replenish his soul energy urgently. The ability of the soul summoning mage was to expel the souls of the deceased and turn them into his own magic. Instead of looking for places with heavy yin energy, he could use precious stones as substitutes. The good news was that this world had many types of precious stones identical to his old world. The corpse god was pleased because if he could recover a fair amount of magic, he could bother the wealthy ladies here. The bad news was that the corpse god had to change his thinking after Takumi advised him to go to a jewelry store to check prices. A tiny stone was equal to a police officer's monthly salary. The corpse god was very depressed because in his old world, even children could buy these inferior stones easily. By the time he could buy this entire shop, it would take at least 100 years for a poor soul like him. On the way back, the corpse god was quite disappointed because a huge source of magic was right in front of him, but he couldn't reach it. If he absorbed it, all the stones here would turn to dust. The trio was chatting when a black man suddenly rushed over and grabbed Takumi's drone. It was Ares from Team 3 managed by Iwanome. Boss Iwanome was still investigating whether the case of Rimba's gang being buried alive was related to Kagis's subordinates. Meanwhile, Misaki warned the corpse god that the man in front of them was very tough to deal with. Even Takumi was silent in the face of the dangerous situation the group was facing. Takumi had planned to stay silent and pretend to be mute to let the matter slide. But the corpse god spoke up to demand the drone back for his friend. As soon as Ares heard that the corpse god was related to this assassin gang, he hurried to advise against it. But contrary to his expectations, this only made the corpse god more furious. He had experienced how society's foul mouth had affected his loved ones in the old world. Therefore, no one had the right to choose friends for him. The killing intent emanating from the corpse god was enough to make Ares hastily retreat. The danger of the corpse god made the black man even more excited. After all, he used to be a gangster in the past. He had taken down Takumi's entire gang in the blink of an eye. Takumi knew this guy better than anyone, so he tried to prevent the corpse god from revealing his power in front of Ares. During the conversation, the corpse god almost revealed his previous life identity. Takumi had to call Ares directly to reconcile, but his real purpose was to buy time to summon more drones to film the police officer beating civilians. Ares couldn't resort to gangster methods, so he turned to exposing Takumi's past. He told about the time Takumi revealed all his teammates' secrets to save his own life. But unfortunately for Ares, the corpse god felt that the teammate was still much better than the black man. The overwhelming aura of the corpse god in a moment had made the police officer slightly scared because he thought the boy was hiding his skills. While the two were exchanging loving glances, Misaki had used the concealment technique. She appeared suddenly behind Ares and delivered a kick that sent him flying into a wall. She quickly pulled the corpse god away from the gloomy alley. Misaki's powerful kick had stunned the black man for a few seconds, but that was enough for the corpse god to use some bones to lift both of them onto the rooftop. After the commotion, the group had a heart-to-heart about why Takumi was being exposed. At that time, the corpse god didn't care about his own secrets being revealed. In his old world, there was a magic from the religious order that could extract all information from others. That was why the corpse god valued comradeship more than his own secrets. The black man had just crawled back to the base to ask his teammates to investigate the footprint on his stomach. An experienced elderly lady who had just seen her junior get beaten came to eavesdrop a bit. Unexpectedly, Ares' teammates immediately recognized that this footprint had appeared at the scene where Jimba's entire gang was buried alive. She advised Ares to go to a private room to do his research to avoid being judged by others. Ares didn't care and flashed a scary smile. From the previous year, Lemon had begun to appear. If ordered, he would do anything, and those who faced him would certainly die. Even if they transformed into something else, the outcome would still be their neck being bent at a right angle. Iwanome at this time was busy drinking with beautiful girls at Kagis's place. He was drinking while revealing information about criminals labeled as calamities like the Reaper or Lemon. Somehow this alcoholic could tell those secrets while surrounded by Kagis's undercover agents. They could still continue to play dumb if the corpse god and the mentally unstable Misaki didn't stop by to cause trouble. At first, Iwanome didn't care until he received a message from Ares. Iwanome quickly invited the Misaki couple to play with him, buying time for his teammates to arrive. Takumi also discovered that Ares was leading a group from the police station. While the corpse god was enjoying the highest quality drink he had ever tasted, Ares' group arrived at Kagis's bar. Takumi arrived in time to warn his team, but it was too late. Just as the corpse god and Misaki were about to be taken to the station, the lights in the bar suddenly went out. It wasn't Kagis's doing to help her subordinates escape. The person who did it was Lemon. The corpse god was planning to use his demon eye to escape with Misaki, but suddenly he sensed an extremely terrifying presence. As Iwanome lit candles, everyone in the room discovered a very frightening figure, the bandaged man Lemon hanging from the chandelier. The flickering candlelight in the room, Lemon jumped from the chandelier and stood firmly on the table. Kagisa realized he came with a different purpose, so she stopped her subordinates from making a move. If he wanted to kill, everyone in this room would have been long dead. Iwanome's team looked grim, determined to capture Lemon at all costs. Several police officers were punched and sent flying outside. Lemon moved with an incredible speed, taking down extras one by one. Ares rushed to fight the mummy warrior to save face for the police. He kicked a bottle of wine straight into the mummy's stomach, but it had no effect. He didn't even regard the police department's trump card and went straight for Misaki. He picked up the fake innocent schoolgirl and fled right in front of the protagonist. The corpse god hesitated to use magic. If the police found out, his life afterward would be no different than pig slop. While the corpse god was deep in thought, Ares continued chasing and fighting Lemon. Lemon kicked him flying into a wall for the second time that day. Most sensibly at this point, the corpse god surrounded Lemon with magic, a bone hand punching the mummy's back, forcing him to release Misaki. Taking the opportunity, the corpse god told Misaki to quickly leave the battlefield. Kagisa also knew the corpse god was taking action, so she put out the last candle to make the police lose direction. Iwanome had just spotted Misaki being held by a bone arm using his flashlight. Lemon didn't intend to let his target escape. He rushed like a god, blowing away all the corpse god's bone arms despite the pitch black surrounding. But when he approached Misaki again, he only exchanged something with her. To protect the corpse god's safety, Misaki had to reveal the secret Lemon wanted to know. She also bit him with a paralyzing toxin, but his bandages were too thick. However, Misaki's goal was to stab her poison-coated blade into Lemon's thigh. He immediately started spinning in confusion. Everything around was like a nightclub due to the poison. While Misaki was buying time, the corpse god had set up a game-hacking spell that made the boss soil his pants. After everything, Kagis's bar was like a mess. Even Iwanome was scared when facing the calamity named Lemon. Lemon wasn't killed by the corpse god. He returned unharmed to report to his superior. He was sent by a handsome brother called Takeru to investigate whether Jimbo was really dead. He also added information about the corpse god after nearly being logged out. Takumi was very surprised that his two leopards survived the recent disaster. Lemon showed up wherever there was drama. Fortunately, although they were chosen as targets, they could still joke around. The corpse god had used quite a bit of energy fighting Lemon, but he still managed to collect some magic from the vengeful spirits killed by Lemon. The corpse god also thanked Misaki because for both to continue breathing, she had to reveal some secret. The corpse god recalled instructions from his master. His master had realized this boy would live extremely long, so he wanted him to help his companions. Currently, the protagonist still felt weak and useless, making it difficult to protect his teammates. Now he was ready to give up a peaceful life to keep his companions from dying early. He finally understood after the tense fight just now. Since his magic amount was still very poor, the protagonist would now focus on getting rich and acquiring precious stones. Though it might sound off topic, the corpse god's power could be used for many tricks. One of them was making pacts with souls that still had consciousness. The pen trying to scribble to convey something to them was an example. The corpse god and Misaki had come up with a clever plan, but as soon as he heard the idea from these two clueless ones, Takumi cursed them out. The pen with which the corpse god had made a pact had an even better idea: turn the clueless protagonist into a fortune teller. thanks to the combined abilities of the group. The plan was implemented without a hitch. Everyone believed the corpse god's prophecies because the information he provided was accurate. Thanks to Takumi and the demon eye, the corpse god helped an old lady find the safe containing her late husband's black funds. They successfully earned quite a bit of money, but the corpse god still decided to share it all with everyone. The real Shino was a bit hyperactive because he didn't want to accept this money. Takumi was about to reveal the enormous family background of this Silver Spoon kid when some men in suits kicked the door open. They were bodyguards of Shino's spoiled nephews and nieces. Thanks to Shino in shark form, the corpse god quickly recognized them. He put on a hood, claimed to be the corpse god, and said some nonsense to fool the kids. Of course, this useless trick couldn't fool anyone. The purpose of the twins' visit wasn't to arrest him, but because they heard their uncle was working as a fortune teller here and wanted to get their fortunes told. Unexpectedly, they were sent away because it wasn't the group's working hours. Takumi even threatened to call the police to take the twins to the station for harassment. Seeing the nephews about to cry in fear, the corpse god deeply hugged the twins. Suddenly, he said both his nephews would have a future and promised the ghost following the two nephews that he would protect them. That was also the commission he accepted from the ghost, always following to protect the twins. Before returning home to fulfill his mission, the protagonist needed to stuff all the knowledge about the real Shino's family tree into his head. Having been a VIP since birth, Shino was the youngest son of the Suzoma Group's chairman, with total assets enough to buy dozens of islands. Surprisingly, the huge fortune from his cunning father would be taken over by Shino. He still had no other plan except to have a bone servant as a bodyguard when returning home. Suddenly, the group remembered the girl with a student's face, but an assassin's character from their team. The twins were doubting whether this man was really their uncle. Both suddenly froze when they saw the face of their brother Takeru already sitting in the car. Just as they were about to be scolded, they reported the news that their father's favorite child was coming home, so they weren't reprimanded. Who knows what dangers would soon befall the twins. The next day, the corpse god brought the real Shino and Misaki to Shino's real home. To celebrate his return, the whole family gathered at the dining table to welcome him. According to what Takumi had said, the person sitting in front of him was his nephew Takeru, his brother's son. Takeru was an extremely fearsome person. At only 26, he was already the security director of Shinoyama, a place rumored to recruit ex-police officers, mainly to clean up scandals and eliminate those who stood in their way. Misaki came as Shino's friend. Having once been a lady from an influential family, the etiquette of the rich didn't trouble her. Beside her were his other niece Seo and her husband Razan. While everyone was talking, suddenly Razan appeared at the door, surprising everyone. The nephew-in-law saw him appear and immediately ran to flatter him, wanting to discuss business. Razan turned away, refusing. He was still retired. If they wanted to discuss business, they should find someone else. His aura was so powerful that it made his nephew-in-law pale and not dare to say much more. After getting rid of the annoyance, Razan asked about Shino. The corpse god, hearing his name mentioned, immediately stood up. He apologized to the man on Shino's behalf for leaving home without saying anything. Razan was indeed a father who spoiled his child. He didn't blame him at all, but just patted his head kindly. He immediately called both the corpse god and Misaki to another room to talk. The corpse god told him roughly the story he had experienced recently, when he thought he had successfully covered everything up. Suddenly, Razan asked a question that made him freeze. Who was he, after all? Razan had clearly recognized this wasn't his son. He immediately drew a sword and pointed it at the corpse god. Although old, he wasn't easy to deal with, and moreover, he was a father. The corpse god suddenly realized he had underestimated the bond between father and son. This father was completely different from the one who had easily sold him for money in his previous life. Suddenly, he had a premonition. The corpse god wanted to call a truce with Razan to go rescue Shizuki and Kazuki. Those kids were in danger. Once done, he would explain to him later. Although he didn't understand, Razan still let him go. Just as the corpse god jumped away, people started shouting about a fire. It was then that Razan realized what he said wasn't a joke. Previously, this house had experienced a serious fire. At that time, Shizuki and Kazuki were still young. The two came home from playing and lost the wallet that their older sister Suzuka had given them. Suzuka saw Kazuki crying a lot, so she went to the garden to find it for her sister. While searching, she overheard a secret she shouldn't have heard from Razan's nephew-in-law. He was cooperating with someone to burn her twin siblings and fake it as an accident scene. He had prepared this plan for 2 years. Suzuka was so shocked that she made a noise and was discovered. She tried to escape but wasn't fast enough and was caught and burned alive by that man. Suzuka's death was considered an accident. Since then, she became a ghost following and protecting the 2 children. Shizuki and Kazuki were now in danger. There was a fire in the house, and a bodyguard appeared and led the 2 away. Suzuka clearly knew something was wrong with that man, but besides watching her 2 siblings run to their deaths, she couldn't do anything else. At Tokyo Detention Center, Iwanom and Ares were arriving to interview another unusual criminal they had caught. He was Solite, a once talented magician. Iwanom came to ask him about the burning orphanage where some skeletons appeared. This fire was identified as related to the fire-spitting bug, a criminal known for leaving horrific crime reports at crime scenes. This world is full of fakery often appeared at fire scenes he caused. The fire also spread at a terrifying speed. Police hypothesized that he might have disguised himself as someone in the house, spent time setting up the fire, then acted, not unlike bugs eating away at a house. The twin siblings were now following the man. He led them to a door down to the basement to escape the fire. Kazuki suddenly stopped. She remembered there was no exit route from that basement. So why was this person leading them down there? The man, seeing he couldn't hide anymore, revealed his true face. He approached the twins, his hands sparking with electricity. Suzuka's soul tried to stop him, screaming in vain. At that moment, Misaki appeared and gave the man a blow that made his human mask fall off, revealing his true face. She quickly told the 2 children to run away so she could fight this person alone. From the beginning, she had recognized that this man knew her. So since they were at the corpse god's house, he had been cautious of her. Seeing he was exposed, he immediately created a fire. Misaki didn't hesitate to play with him. Her strength made him doubt whether she was a monster rather than a human. How could a person be so strong? Misaki took an iron bar and spun it to fan away the fire he created. At this point, she realized this man wasn't panicking when the 2 children ran away. He had burned down this whole area. Shizuki and Kazuki held hands, accepting their fate. Perhaps this was their karma. Surely Sister Suzuka must have hated them back then. It was because of them that she died. Both swore that when they got down there, they would properly apologize to her. Just as they thought they were about to die, they no longer saw wooden beams falling on their heads. Instead, Shino appeared. He summoned magic to prevent the ceiling from falling on the 2 children and rescued them from there. Takeru had now grasped the situation and sent his men to clean up the aftermath. Rosin's nephew-in-law was smugly escaping when he was caught by the Shinoyama family's assassins. The fire-spitting bug was very confused when he saw the 2 children still safe and sound. He was caught by the corpse god while in the disguise of a servant. How could he fool the demon eyes? Even if he changed his appearance, the color of his soul remained the same. Moreover, he was haunted by the vengeful spirits of those he had killed. The fire-spitting bug tried to escape, but was kicked into a wall by Misaki. If he had enough magic power, the corpse god would have tortured this man for hundreds of years. The fire-spitting bug laughed contemptuously. The corpse god reminded him of little boys with delusions of power. He immediately created a large fire separating Misaki and the corpse god from him. The corpse god broke out in a cold sweat. He worried whether he had enough magic power to cross this fire. Suddenly, he saw a figure standing beside the fire-spitting bug. Lemon had appeared out of nowhere and smashed the man's head into the ground, killing him instantly. He appeared mysteriously and disappeared just as mysteriously, leaving them only a signal to keep this matter secret. The nephew-in-law had been brought back to headquarters by Takeru for questioning. A fool of this level daring to go against the entire family. After hearing what Iwanom said about the fire-spitting bug, Solite found it very amusing. The fire-spitting bug, a master of disguise and house-trap design. Those were just characteristics of an ordinary villain, an impersonator. The real fire-spitting bug's actions far exceeded ordinary people and didn't involve any petty methods. Moreover, Solite discovered that Iwanom was hiding the latter part of the message left by the real fire-spitting bug. At this point, as the fake fire-spitting bug was being escorted by the police, suddenly a line of fire writing appeared on the ceiling of the car. The police officers suddenly stared at him as if hypnotized. By the time the fake fire-spitting bug realized, he had already been burned to death. The police officers suddenly returned to normal and jumped out of the car before it completely exploded. The real, genuine fire-spitting bug had appeared and killed the imposter. After the fire ended and everything was handled smoothly, the corpse god returned to talk with Shino's father as promised. because the story he was about to tell was a secret. He wanted the attendants silently standing nearby to leave. Razin was very surprised. He was certain that his subordinates had concealed their breathing. Yet the corpse god still detected their presence. Razin ordered them to leave as requested. Only then did the corpse god feel comfortable telling the story about his true identity and how everything began. After hearing the story, Razin could hardly believe his ears. It was a story that no one could believe, but looking at those self-moving eyes, he had no choice but to believe. Nevertheless, he still couldn't forgive Misaki after knowing she was the one who killed his son. Razin immediately pointed his sword at Misaki. Shino suddenly jumped out in his stuffed shark form to intervene. This action made the father recall a previous scene, and immediately guessed this was his son. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry anymore. Looking at his son whose body had been taken over now living in a stuffed shark, he seemed so happy. It seemed that being in this shark form wasn't so bad. He had been bouncing around in front of him for a while now. Seeing this, Razin couldn't stay angry. Razin suggested a body for the corpse god, a sophisticated robot that the Shinoyama family was researching. Shino was very eager. Since he was exchanging bodies anyway, wouldn't a high-quality body be better? He wanted a robot body with drills and the ability to fly. It already sounded cool. In short, if there was really someone who wanted to take Shino's life, then the father fully approved of the corpse god continuing to use his son's body. The two returned intact. The corpse god called to report to Takumi. Although he had spilled all his secrets, it was only to Razin, so it should be fine. After the fire, Shark Shino still greatly regretted his burned belongings. Misaki approached to comfort Shino and apologize for killing him. All problems became meaningless when his face was pressed against something soft and comfortable. The corpse god felt extremely surprised that someone could easily forgive their killer like that. Razin's two grandchildren ran out to thank Misaki and the corpse god for saving them in the fire. The corpse god took the opportunity to promote the name the corpse god to the two kids. The soul following them had fulfilled its wish. Suzuka was now back to normal and continued to follow and protect the children. Iwanome was interviewing the magician when he suddenly heard that the arsonist had been killed. Soulite demanded to see the footage of the arson scene, but Iwanome wanted him to provide some information first. There had to be give and take. Suddenly, the lights went out. When they came back on, somehow Soulite, who had been handcuffed, had disappeared. Soulite's disappearance caused trouble for team leader Iwanome and the black-haired Ares. The first case he committed was 3 years ago, stealing paintings to create content for streamers. How thoughtful. The second case was somehow making a government building suddenly disappear. This time it involved human lives, but there wasn't enough evidence. There was also the case of kidnapping the Prime Minister with black cloth. The Prime Minister was covered with a large bag over his head, and when the bodyguards removed it, he had already disappeared. Soulite then went on television to boast very grandly, making Japan a laughingstock for the whole world. The Prime Minister was later released, but seemed to still be cheerful and normal. Afterward, Soulite came to the police station to surrender, demanding that Iwanome put handcuffs on him, and saying nonsense about using his magic to deceive the owner himself. Soulite wanted to inform other criminals out there that real magic existed. He caused chaos in Japan just to find his talented students. While outside was full of turmoil, Takumi and the corpse god were still leisurely shopping. The two had just bought a radio. When they turned it on to test, it happened to be talking about the fire this afternoon and Soulite's message. Iwanome's police team had also seen the news. This really made the police furious. All the information they had covered up was exposed by this guy. Soulite went on television to introduce himself, announcing to the whole world that he had returned and was more powerful than before. A very grand comeback, promising to see everyone next week. Until then, just enjoy the peaceful life. Iwanome guessed that he might have bought something from a place called a general store to be able to hijack the broadcast. Soulite approached the fire-spitting bug to persuade him to join his side. He preached for a long time, but the other person remained silent. Suddenly, Soulite received a phone call. He thought it was the general store owner calling, but it was the fire-spitting bug standing less than 10 meters away from him. The fire-spitting bug asked him how he could detect his presence. He had even planned to burn him alive. Did he think this trick was that simple? Just disguise yourself and that's it. The corpse gods group determined that Soulite was a dangerous person. In his world, he had never seen a case like this. There were usually more abnormal cases that were creepy just to hear about. There was even a calamity destroyer who could kill him. This world didn't have dragons. Yet the dragon shape that humans imagined was quite similar to the dragons in the corpse god's world. Hiroshi guessed that perhaps the things we imagine here are similar to real entities in other worlds. There seem to be fire and wind spirits too. Speaking of fire spirits, the fire-spitting bug was no different. He used fire to attack Solite continuously. Solite utilized his agility and ability to escape the sea of fire created by the fire-spitting bug. His limbs were moving, but his mouth was still smoothly trying to persuade him to join his side. Even though he was being burned, he still wouldn't give up. The fire-spitting bug felt that he and Solite didn't share the same ideology. After a period of one-on-one combat, Solite suddenly gained the upper hand, appearing right on the fire-spitting bug's window. Solite greatly regretted that the fire-spitting bug's power wasn't some fairy tale magic as he had thought. The fire-spitting bug wasn't interested in fairy tales. If there were things that were like fairy tales that he considered as worms of the world, he would handle them himself. The corpse gods trio was still eagerly chatting about everything under the sun regarding the two worlds when suddenly there was a doorbell. Seo, Shino's niece, suddenly came to visit, greatly surprising all three of them. Seo showed a video recording of Razan to everyone. Razan wanted to entrust Seo to stay with the corpse god. Both Shino's real room and Soya's room at home had been burned to ashes, so he wanted Seo to stay at his son's place for a while. Also, he sent some bodyguards to watch over them. The corpse god felt this was also an opportunity for him to check if Seo was targeting him, so he agreed to let her and her bodyguard stay. The next morning, when the protagonist woke up, he saw Seo lying inside the shark toy, messing around on the floor. Although the shark fan herself said she was fine with just a sleeping bag, the group couldn't let the two new members sleep standing or rolling around on the floor like that. They were about to go buy mattresses when the group heard news that Xiaodu was currently being questioned by the police. Indeed, Iwanom and Ares had come to investigate the suspicious things in this case. Looking at the dazed appearance of the duo, the sisters Kazuki and Shizuki didn't expect that they were the police officers investigating. They thought they might be gangsters coming to collect debts. Before they could ask anything, the riot-suppressing god Takeru had already appeared to greet them. The police station duo had traveled a long way to ask for information about the fire-spitting bug. Instead of getting more clues, Iwanom was questioned about why calamities like the fire-spitting bug were roaming freely on the streets. Moreover, Iwanom was doubly embarrassed when Takeru mentioned the news that Phantom Solite had just escaped. Previously, he had kidnapped Japanese leaders right on live television, causing stock prices to plummet uncontrollably, affecting households everywhere, with no exception for the Soyama family. Takeru demanded that the police stop fooling around and do something useful instead. After leaving, Ares told Iwanom that the two men following Takeru were highly likely to be ninjas, especially the tall one. Ares thought he was the type of person like himself who liked using fists to solve problems. Their trip still yielded unexpected harvests. Iwanom had quickly and stealthily taken a photo of the Shinomiya family tree spanning 3 generations. Most notably, the young Shino was also in that photo. According to the reports they received, both the corpse god and Misaki had appeared at the fire scene. This couldn't just be another absurdly random coincidence. Iwanom realized that recent events were all related to this person. On the corpse god's group side, they had prepared bedrooms and mattresses for the two new reluctant members. Xiaodu's sleeping place was as small as a public toilet, but he was still very satisfied. Both quickly settled in their positions, and the corpse god's group returned to their operations room. That night, while Seo was sleeping like the dead, Xiaodu woke up to eavesdrop on the conversation between the corpse god and his teammates. Xiaodu wanted to expose the true face of the impersonator of the Shinomiya family's young master. Although Razan had vouched for the fake Shino's credibility, Xiaodu still decided to doubt till the end. Additionally, if the real Shino was still alive, he would eliminate the person impersonating the young master. The main reason was that Xiaodu saw Shino as a weakling, so he felt that he was more deserving to be Razan's son. Xiaodu recalled the moment he lost his 4 limbs during his first mission with his old family. His biological father had planned to use his son's disabled body to turn into a device for the family, nurturing the most disgusting toxins in his organs, which was more painful than immediate death. At that moment, Shino's father appeared like a god and offered to buy the pitiful Xiaodu. He couldn't watch a boy being used as a trivial tool by those mad scientists. In return, Razan gave his family access to the latest technologies of the corporation. That was one of the rare times someone smiled and saved his miserable life. Boss Kajisa also recounted the mysterious lineage of the Shinomiya family with its bright and dark sides. They had an assassin organization, so according to Kajisa's two girls, hiring outside assassins to execute the real Shino seemed cumbersome. That was actually understandable because Shino was Rasen's favorite son, so it was difficult to act. The assassin organization closely linked to the Shinomiya family was Zyudu's family, full of people with heretical practices. On the Corpse Gods group side, they were still being eavesdropped on by Zyudu without knowing it. But most of what the group talked about only related to the dragons from the protagonist's old world, including a love story between a mixed dragon and an imperial general. After listening, Zyudu thought they were delusional because he couldn't understand which game they were discussing. Moreover, occasionally he heard clattering sounds as Misaki was dancing with some skeletons. Sometimes he also heard the frantic writing of the soul that had made a pact with the corpse god, as the pen moved by itself. While not understanding what was happening, Zyudu was startled because the corpse god knew he wasn't asleep yet and was guarding in front of Seo's room. For a skilled assassin, this was like an indirect threat. This made Zyudu even more determined to expose the true face of this young master. At the police station, the team led by Iwanome started paying more attention to the Shinomiya family's young master. The information Iwanome and Ares gathered centered first on the fact that Shino had just left home to wander and had contact with the information trader Takumi. Next, he spoke very much like game addicts. Before, the corpse god had accidentally mentioned being sold by his family in the old world. For others, this detail would be thrown in the trash. But a nosy person like Iwanome noticed the abnormality here. Shino was living happily with his family, so why would he say he was thrown in the trash? Finally, the corpse god was working as a medium in the center of Shinjuku. This could be good news for Solite because he was hunting for real sorcerers in this world. Indeed, Phantom Solite was trying to reintegrate into society after years in prison. While showing off to his fans, he accidentally ran into the police. Thus, a marathon was organized between the show-off saint and the two policemen. The corpse gods group was preparing to earn some money when Iwanome and Ares knocked on their door to inquire. The sudden raid by these two made Takumi sit and shake like a hairdryer under the table. The purpose of both coming here was to verify whether the fortune-telling talent of the corpse god was as credible as rumored. How will the Holy Professional Marks group deal with this dangerous situation? Iwanome hadn't come today to cause trouble with the corpse gods group. He just wanted to verify the psychological manipulation skills of the Holy Professional Mark. As for Ares, today he was just there to eavesdrop, with no intention of getting his fortune told. During their conversation, both of them also noticed Takumi's desk in the corner of the room. First, to prevent the keyboard hero from being taken to the station for tea, the corpse god invited the two distinguished guests to the next room to conduct business. Before getting to the main session, Iwanome reminded the corpse god that he needed to pay taxes if he wanted to practice fortune-telling. At the beginning, the corpse god preemptively stopped Iwanome, saying he couldn't reveal Solite's location, so don't ask such redundant questions. It was a humiliation for the police, and the team leader's face wasn't thick enough to ask him to solve it. Seeing the corpse god's demeanor as he made the crystal ball glow surprised Seo about her uncle. Even the blade-wielding boss Zyudu had to admit that the corpse god's tricks were quite something. But he was still waiting for an opportunity to have the two policemen take him to the police station. Back to the fortune-telling. The very accurate information made Iwanome just sit and guess how Takumi was relaying information to the protagonist. Takumi even obtained information that Iwanome was looking for a blind date to escape the fate of being friends with his right hand. Now moving on to more interesting events that Iwanome couldn't maintain a calm face for. The corpse god suddenly mentioned the biggest crisis in Iwanome's life, but he didn't tell him how to solve it. Suddenly, the pen on the table stood upright, almost making the team leader's heart leave his body to travel. While the miraculous pen was writing something, Zyudu, who was watching, recalled hearing this sound last night. Surely these guys had prepared this trick beforehand. After seeing what the pen had written, Iwanome suddenly lost his composure and lunged to grab the corpse god by the collar. The drawing reminded him of the time he worked with his senior. This was the symbol that person had shown Iwanome and then quickly burned. Iwanome was very surprised about how the Shinomiya family's young master knew this secret. But Iwanome quickly regained his composure and paid a considerable sum as compensation for wrinkling the corpse god's shirt. Before the police station's cursed duo wandered off elsewhere, they had heard their true identities. The name the corpse god made Iwanome associate it with a calamity. Everything was back in place, but Xiao felt something strange about Iwanom during the fortune-telling session. But he still had to fulfill his role as a butler, so he couldn't stay to eavesdrop more. While Iwanom was dining with his colleague, the atmosphere seemed a bit silent. Iwanom decided to speak first to let Ares comfortably interview him about why he lost his composure earlier. Something enough to make a person as calm as the blonde man have his hair stand on end. Iwanom had promised to explain everything to his teammate during the time they moved to the next location. Xiao wanted to know exactly what had happened, so he took the opportunity to make an excuse to go buy food and some sharks for Seo. Now he had a little time to follow the police's main duo. At another location, a gang of criminals was trying to retrieve a scroll containing important information. Unfortunately, they had been ambushed by the fire-spitting bug from behind. In the end, the person who got the tattered paper was Phantom Solite. He also discovered a secret symbol inside the paper. Solite had smelled something interesting from this symbol, so he had a crazy plan in his head. Back to the Corpse God's group. After escaping the fate of being questioned by the police, the Corpse God had confessed the truth. He didn't see any souls following Iwanom. So what about the symbol that made someone like the blonde-haired man panic? Where did he get it from? Iwanom went to find Kajisa. But this time, he wanted to ask for information about that person. He knew Shino had connections to Kajisa's organization, so what he wanted to know was why that person wanted to pass information that only he and that person knew through Shino. But Kajisa, listening so far, didn't understand because she didn't know who Iwanom was referring to. While the two were arguing, the busybody Xiao was still hiding in the ventilation duct, eavesdropping. The Corpse God also honestly said that since the room was too dark, he didn't know what the content of the paper was. The person that Iwanom was looking for was currently the pen that had made a pact with the Corpse God, named Hasu Yogi. He was also Kajisa's beloved senior. Finally, everything was clear because the senior Iwanom had always been looking for was the pen from earlier. Misaki was also very interested to know that Hasu Yogi had known the blonde police officer from the beginning. What made team leader Iwanom quite angry was that Hasu Yogi had once said their life protection room had the duty to protect the past, present, and future for the children. Therefore, involving a child in such dangerous events was unnecessary. So he wanted to confirm whether Kajisa was exploiting the children for profit. Kajisa had blamed the things surrounding the Corpse God as definitely heaven's will, and she just lent the house to the kids. This could cause the Corpse God and Misaki to be visited by evil forces. Before leaving the bar, Iwanom had promised to purge the entire police force for his senior to return one day. Kajisa's subordinates were also quite worried that the Corpse God was involved with Hasu Yogi, but Kajisa had reassured everyone. As for Xiao, after being so nosy, he had also concluded several targets that needed to be eliminated to protect Razan. Takumi and Misaki were in psychological shock because the Corpse God's contract pen had once been a prosecutor, a position that could both monitor criminals and eliminate dirty cops in the police station. In the wholly professional Mark's old world, there was also someone with a position somewhat similar to that, but he seemed a bit more brutal. The Corpse God and his teammates were thinking of asking for some information, but were blackmailed by Hasu Yogi for providing information. Before getting into this case, they had to earn 1 million yen, and Hasu Yogi would take care of the earning part. The group had to fulfill his final lifetime wish. This was also a condition of the contract. In exchange for Hasu Yogi's obedience, the Corpse God had to help him complete his unfinished wish. At a prison, Solite was disguising himself as a warden to access the information warehouse of the general store. Here, you could exchange any information as long as you had something of equivalent value to that information. Solite wanted to know information about the symbol he had collected from the criminals burned by the fire-spitting bug. According to the history collected by the police department, the general store owner was a businessman who existed 100 years ago. But in the end, because he had done too many dishonest trades, he was caught. Now, this hooded man was the descendant of that businessman with the nickname General Store. The General Store also had influence on many countries due to his information trading skills. But currently, Solite had nothing to exchange for this valuable information. He was only good at carving some apples and showing the General Store how to apply oil on his hands when counting money to avoid scratching them. The General Store had mentioned that the symbol was related to cards and ancient knights from Central Europe to Eastern Europe. Now the trial period had expired. To know more details, Solite had to buy the VIP package or leave. However, the General Store only exchanged based on the value that the customer could bring to him. The price Solite had to pay could be tens of thousands of times more expensive than ordinary people because he was a calamity. The symbol Hasu Yogi drew for Iwanom was identical to the national emblem of a fallen kingdom in the corpse god's world, and now it was hovering all over the skies of Japan. This had stirred up a wave in some mysterious group. They demanded the elimination of the first person to reveal this trick and expose them to the public Solite. Previously, one of their accomplices had been attacked by the fire-spitting bug. It was the one trying to destroy the evidence in the safe, but was burned to death before he could do so. Somehow, Solite, who was following, picked up the scroll with that symbol printed on it. However, killing Solite could expose their whereabouts, just like 5 years ago. Iwanom looked up at the sky. He didn't believe this was a coincidence. On the exact day that Hasu Yogi disappeared 5 years ago, a series of symbols were drawn on balloons released into the sky. This show was directed by Solite. This guy might also be related to the people who killed Hasu Yogi. He might have spied when Iwanom went to the corpse god for fortune-telling and eavesdropped on something. Was Solite trying to convey something? The situation was getting worse. People from the police headquarters came to find Iwanom to settle the score. Solite was leisurely enjoying fame on top of the balloon. The information he wanted to buy was worth 3,000 billion yen, simply because the general store believed he had the ability to earn 6,000 billion yen. The general store guaranteed that this information was like a medicine that would determine Solite's fate, but if used incorrectly, he would die. However, Solite didn't agree to the transaction and wanted to find the answer himself. The Solite dummies arranged on the balloon were successively shot down by assassins, but he wasn't afraid and even broadcast this news on TV. Some organization was trying to cover up this matter. It proved that someone had infiltrated the police force to know his location, because previously, only police aircraft could determine which balloon he was on. This symbol must have a problem. Solite immediately offered a reward for anyone who could provide more information about this symbol. The corpse god assessed that the situation seemed bad, but first, he had to deal with this niece. His group seemed a bit careless when they let Seo know all the secrets about reincarnation and past lives, and now they had to explain themselves. In general, the corpse god was a reincarnated person, defeated by a hero and entered Shino's body, while the real Shino's soul was still safe. Despite how far-fetched it sounded, this niece still believed it. Basically, because she had already vaguely guessed it. All of his gestures and actions weren't like Shino's at all. Now, just needing a bath to calm the mind, she conveniently took the real shark Shino along without knowing it was her uncle. To prepare for the worst case, Takumi asked the death god if there was a memory erasing technique. The soul summoning technique put a controlled soul into the body. The opponent's soul had a part of its memory cut off, causing a chain effect on the brain. It wasn't difficult, but for people in this world, he didn't know. If not careful, it could ruin them completely, but applying it to enemies should be fine. Especially those thugs from before were really insidious people who shouldn't be made enemies of. However, comparing the two sides, Takumi still found that Misaki, who was always grinning, was scarier. Misaki was currently bathing with Seo, actually to let her ask who killed Shino. Misaki confessed that she was the one who killed Seo's uncle. Then she was counter-questioned. Seo thought she felt guilty about her actions, so she went looking for someone to scold her. Although Shino had forgiven her, the feeling hadn't diminished at all. That's why Misaki wanted to find someone to blame her. But it's okay, Seo forgave Misaki. She wouldn't do anything, seeing that the secret had been exposed. Misaki also admitted to Seo that people who like sharks are all good people. The real Shino, eavesdropping all this time, was pretending not to see anything. Besides the shark reason, another reason for Seo to forgive Misaki was that she had saved Shizuki and Kazuki. Misaki didn't know how to react properly, so she had to sit and chat with Seo. Takumi heard the story and was furious. This Seo girl was no different than someone with a short circuit. Seo felt very wronged. She couldn't understand why they thought she had sent someone to assassinate Shino. Because she liked sharks, she would definitely throw Shino to the sharks. There was no need to hire an assassin. Shark Shino was blushing red in Seo's arms. Takumi found it strange, so he picked it up to check. Being a shark was really suffering. Seo only now realized that it wasn't a normal shark but her uncle. By this time, it was too late. Thinking about the scene of changing clothes being seen was humiliating but still felt good. She also wanted to be a shark. Otherwise, the corpse god could let Shino borrow her body and put her soul into the shark. Seo's thoughts changed so rapidly that even her uncle couldn't keep up, let alone outsiders. The corpse god wanted to meet the group of people who were planning to use that symbol for something shady to talk. That symbol was a precious memory from his old world, and now it was being tarnished, so he couldn't ignore it. Takumi suggested investigating the organization behind it. However, this could also be a trick by Soulite. That Soulite couldn't be from the corpse god's world because he wanted information about that symbol. Based on magic analysis, the corpse god wasn't sure if there were other reincarnated people. The blockhouses he summoned at that time were also quite surprising. He only used surrounding objects as vessels. What he summoned over were souls. He used to have many souls before coming here, but all had been disbanded. Yet someone could still make contracts with them. For Shino, summoning was a sin. Even if Seo comforted him, he didn't know if smiling while performing the ritual of summoning those souls would be forgiven. The important thing now was how to deal with that symbol. For things like this, just let the analyst mage Takumi handle it. Takumi began investigating from the police side first. Hasuyogi also lent a hand by giving everyone a little information, while also warning everyone, do what you want, but be careful. The police organization is more terrifying than you think. Iwanome was currently meeting with a big boss of the police department, Director Jidotazu. This case was so tense that Inspector Habaki, who had once led him to change workplaces, also had to return. Jidotazu looked fierce, but Iwanome didn't tremble a bit. The director wanted him to cooperate like a gear with him. Cooperation he was good at, unless there was a pebble between the two of them. For the director, that pebble was Hasuyogi. The director understood that he was considering highway robbers as roadside pebbles, but what he meant was that the sewer rats had driven Hasuyogi to a dead end. Hearing his answer, Jidotazu nodded. It turned out this was just a test from him for Iwanome. Today, he called him over because he wanted him to become a core member of the Soulite case. Takumi had hacked into the police department's data to see what Iwanome was investigating. But unexpectedly, the computer genius's movements were detected by Soulite's henchmen and reported to him. The number of clients coming for fortune-telling at the protagonist's place was growing daily. Takumi had spent the whole night researching information about the symbols, but everything was still very vague. The only noteworthy point was that at the moment Hasuyogi was close to finding the answer, he disappeared without a trace. Hasuyogi also recounted the moment he had almost caught the mastermind. Someone had hired an assassin to kill him in the very building where they all were operating. There was only one possibility. The culprit was someone inside the police force who dared to touch an inspector like Hasuyogi. He only said this much because there was still a lot of information he couldn't confirm. Saying too many uncertain things could endanger the safety of the group and Shino's family. There was a nosy person on the lower floor who was chopping carrots while eavesdropping on the drama. Ziodu also knew there were problems within the police force, but what he doubted more was the conversation style of the whole group. Occasionally, the corpse god's group would fall silent for a few seconds for no reason, then continue chatting. Iwanome was summarizing what his Team 3 had gathered for other police chiefs. They needed to investigate the symbol that was causing Soulite to spread rumors everywhere. Most were paying attention to Iwanome's explanation, but there were still some malicious ones cursing the duo Iwanome and Ares. At the workplace, the corpse god was still giving guidance to a middle-aged uncle. Actually, this was Soulite disguising himself as this uncle to come for fortune-telling. All the information was accurate, but Soulite guessed the hacker Takumi had told it to the corpse god. He was somewhat disappointed because this fortune-teller was still just a mortal. Seeing this uncle a bit sad, the corpse god offered to answer one of his questions. Soulite asked about the symbol he was pursuing with the purpose of earning 300 million for pocket money, but he predicted the corpse god couldn't decode the symbol. However, he wouldn't have expected that the dialogue from this moment would give him a different perspective on the holy professional mark. The corpse god mentioned the errors in the symbol that Soulite was pursuing and asked Hasuyogi to perform as usual. Then came his moment of frozen shock. For a moment, Soulite thought he had found the truth, but he had to calm himself immediately, because if the fortune teller in front of him was from some dark organization, it would be difficult for him to keep his petty life. Hasuyogi had gently reminded the corpse god not to let his mouth go too far to avoid revealing more information. Of course, with his all-embracing nature, the corpse god couldn't watch the symbol he cherished be faked. Before Soulite played his hand and left the place that had been making his spine chill, the corpse god gave him a bonus piece of information. The girl in the wheelchair behind him was very worried about Soulite's life. This was the second shock since Phantom Soulite brought his face to ask for a fortune. The holy professional mark had gained recognition from one of Japan's calamities. Initially, he thought the boy was a con artist like himself, but somehow he knew the identity of the wheelchair girl. Another piece of good news was that Solite had discovered the fire-spitting bug had also come here to scout. The duo Iwanome and Ares were also very troubled by the mission to track down Solite. The symbol he was spreading everywhere was also different from the original image, but they couldn't publicly share this information. There was a high possibility that enemies were hiding within the police force. Although the deadly pair of Team 3 had too many targets to pursue, they were fortunate to be provided with additional manpower. In the middle of their chat, two irritable police officers came to Iwanome's place to cause trouble. The blonde-haired man wasn't a novice, so he immediately countered with the matter of these two taking bribes. One of them angrily grabbed Iwanome's collar and threatened the team leader not to touch his territory. Of course, Iwanome wouldn't easily agree with those who liked to intimidate others. The police chief was about to resort to thuggish behavior when Ares firmly gripped his wrist. If not for Iwanome telling his teammate to stop with a cool demeanor, someone would have had their arm broken. Iwanome's teammates from the life safety room had shown themselves. Some pushed down the nasty old man, others conveniently dislocated the police chief's wrist joint. With a simple technique, they had countered the tricks of the two corrupted cops. The cool appearance of the two teammates stole all of Iwanome's spotlight in his moment of creating an impression. Mr. Habaki had also just arrived to end this standoff. After hearing everything from Iwanome, Habaki advised him not to challenge these old men. Recently, the police force's internal affairs were having headaches trying to find moles in the organization. Habaki still stood on Iwanome's side, but he still hoped this young bull would cause less trouble. So the blonde-haired man returned to his teammates from Team 3 who were waiting outside. He guessed that in this case, other calamities would also be involved. But what Team 3 needed to do was focus on protecting the city and capturing the heads of the calamities. Xiaodu at home was helpless because even Xiaodu's family news channels couldn't find any juicy information. Suddenly, he heard the sound of an intruder. Indeed, Solite had come to the corpse god's house to confirm a few things again. He was walking and babbling nonsense as usual. Suddenly, several knives flew from behind straight at him. He easily used some cards to block the throwing knives. He thought it was the corpse god welcoming him, but it wasn't. From behind the wall was Xiaodu, the Shinami family's assassin. The corpse god was sleeping soundly below and had no idea what was happening around him. Suddenly, Shino discovered words being inscribed by fire gradually appearing on the wall. The familiar singing of the fire-spitting bug rose again when he was active. The holy professional mark was dreaming about the day the empire was destroyed. The corpse god had intended to help the soldiers, but his master had stopped him. The barriers restraining them had been broken, and his master didn't want to be buried alongside those from the empire. She had sent another disciple to protect their acquaintances. The master had told the corpse god to prepare to leave the capitalists who had been exploiting them for a long time. Before leaving, she also instructed the corpse god to cherish the teammates beside him. However, this was something he couldn't promise his master, because afterward, his loved ones were executed. Due to the great flame of hatred, the corpse god had unintentionally sent many church soldiers to their deaths. The moment the corpse god walked aimlessly, he once again met his close friend. The protagonist had woken from his dream thanks to the real Shino slapping his face a few times. He discovered the fire-spitting bug's message left on the adjacent wall. Before he could investigate, he was called by the fire-spitting bug himself. He deliberately asked if the corpse god was a product of Sabraman. As soon as he heard this term, the corpse god changed his childish voice to a cold one. On the rooftop, Solite was also talking crazy to probe who this kid was. Xiaodu had coldly approached and slashed at Solite twice, but he had dodged. Solite was boasting again because he had dodged the previous attacks when Xiaodu's hands turned into long knives. Takeru's group had also discovered that there was tension around the corpse god's house. With a genius mind like his, Takeru was the fisherman who would benefit from this conflict. The fire-spitting bug's incoherent conversation was very confusing. He felt sorry for Shino. It was cruel that even a child like him was dragged into this. The corpse god asked about Sabraman. Could this be someone from his old world? The fire-spitting bug didn't know what he was talking about. The corpse god felt like he was pretending to be innocent. He couldn't communicate with this guy. The writing on the wall had just started burning, so he had to use his power to check the situation around. The corpse god couldn't detect the fire-spitting bug, but saw Solite and Xiaodu fighting enthusiastically on the rooftop. Soulite was extremely excited. This boy had the potential to become a magician. Xiaodu wanted to probe the situation from Soulite's mouth. He wanted to know why he came looking for Shino. Friend or foe, say quickly before he made his judgment. Clearly, this guy wasn't from Heli, but Xiaodu couldn't keep up with his speed. Xiaodu played a psychological card by mentioning Hasu Yogi's name. Although he didn't know who that was, Soulite still countered the strategy by pretending to know. He said Hasu Yogi had done him a favor, so he came to say thanks, not expecting to dig his own grave. A criminal familiar with a prosecutor from the police station. Xiaodu immediately realized this guy was lying. Regardless of whether this person had a grudge against his master or not, Xiaodu would charge in to deal with him first, then force him to confess the truth later. Soulite was also ready to fight back. Unexpectedly, in the critical moment, a black horse appeared, blocking the way. Lemon fell from the sky, making everyone gape in astonishment. Lemon was a monster with an unclear identity that Xiaodu's Heli family strictly prohibited touching. Xiaodu immediately became cautious and retreated. Could this guy be on the same side as Soulite? Just as he was planning to escape from this place, suddenly someone arrived. Soulite immediately boasted that this was his trick. Seeing Lemon walking towards Xiaodu, he tried hard to persuade Lemon not to touch Xiaodu, but he talked too much and became a target himself. Lemon was Takeru's henchman. No one in the family knew about Lemon's existence or the assassins under Takeru's command. Takeru would certainly not harm Xiaodu, a person from the Shino family. However, that dismissive attitude made Xiaodu feel insulted. Continuously attacking Lemon, Lemon ignored him and charged at Soulite, cornering him. Xiaodu decided to deal with both. Downstairs, a strange girl in a raincoat related to the fire-spitting bug was stopped by the police. It's dangerous to have children on the street at this hour. The phone suddenly being cut off confused the corpse god. However, the fragmented information related to the old world he had lived in made him very concerned. The corpse god couldn't ignore any clues. In the old world, what was stained like a stain was him, and the important irreplaceable people to him were taboo not to be tainted. What he needed to do now was to control the current situation. The corpse god immediately used magic to enter the battle. In the corpse god's old world, Master Yomka was chatting with her friend Elise. Looking at the place that was the Empire 100 years ago, the master missed that foolish student. Perhaps after so much time, he was still a child. Elise thought the corpse god was usually a very obedient child, only different on the battlefield. But Yomka didn't agree with that. That kid wasn't obedient at all. That student surpassed her in one aspect: the ability to empathize, to trust and entrust everything to teammates. He had the ability to synchronize with the dead, which was why even if he himself was treated unjustly, he didn't care. Only when his haven was defiled would he completely lose control. For example, right now, the corpse god was using magic to observe and analyze the surrounding situation. His power was stronger than ever. The girl in the raincoat who was detained and questioned by the police was now explaining. She said she was looking for a lost dog with her father. It had run up to this building, and she was wearing a raincoat because she didn't want her clothes to get dirty. A man claiming to be her father suddenly appeared and took her away. The corpse god observed everything and realized that the girl was lying. He couldn't sense the presence of any dog in the building. The soul colors of that girl and the person confronting Lemon on the rooftop both seemed very familiar to him. Both had come for fortune-telling and asked questions about the same issue. The corpse god decided to extend his power network wider, covering the entire neighborhood. This was otherworld infiltration. The spellcaster only needed to blend the air from the other world around them or in a closed space to create a similar atmosphere. For those without demon eyes, this feeling was extremely subtle, but just by spending time on the ritual, it would cause hallucinations, disorienting direction and vision. The corpse god had practiced to the point where he could now envelop his power over the entire city. Everyone could feel the uncomfortable change in the surrounding air. The corpse god moved to the rooftop, though he didn't want to face Lemon directly. The corpse god decided to deploy an invisible hand to support Xiaodu. Taking advantage of everyone's distraction due to the changing atmosphere, Soulite launched an attack toward Lemon. However, before the cards could reach their target, they were crushed in midair. Lemon was blocked by the corpse god's invisible hand, tearing his clothes. Soulite saw that the situation wasn't good. The only option was to escape. Even his running away was grand and showy. The corpse god created a giant invisible hand to attack both Lemon and Soulite. However, both were agile enough to dodge and escape. The strange girl in the raincoat had also been caught. Lemon jumped up wanting to grab Solite to give him a beating, but ended up only grabbing the corner of his coat. Solite used a hot air balloon to fly straight into the sky to everyone's amazement. The giant hand that the corpse god had summoned was seen by Takeru's henchmen and recorded to show him. This had caused public confusion as a mysterious event. Some even wanted to seize that power to take them to the peak of glory. Takumi was drinking water while watching Pretty Girl's live streaming. He also noticed this girl was approaching the group's work base. Surprisingly, this cosplay girl accidentally captured footage of the corpse god's hands from the building's rooftop. Takumi suddenly choked on his water when he saw this scene. Not unexpectedly, the next morning, the corpse god's group's headquarters was no different than a marketplace. Police and citizens were all present to witness the commotion. Iwanome was in a difficult position because the building's owner was Boss Kajisa, the person he least wanted to mess with. At this crucial moment, two assassins hunting Solite also limped to Kajisa's place to ask for work. Although they had just failed an important mission that left them unemployed, this duo was still quite strong. Jin accidentally criticized Boss Kajisa's age and was immediately grabbed by the head by her subordinate. Seeing how the girl tried to escape from King Kong's hand made everyone think she was cute. So Kajisa agreed to let them work for her because things would get very busy soon. In just one night, the corpse god had sent the peaceful life he longed for away, never to return. He was being questioned by the keyboard hero and shark addict about his reckless actions last night. Some citizens had started to believe these phenomena weren't photoshopped. The corpse god guessed that both Lemon and Solite knew about his power, but for Xiaodu, he wasn't sure. Actually, Xiaodu was trying to call Razin to ask about this matter. Another important piece of information was that Solite had come here to ask the corpse god for a fortune. The color of his soul plus the guardian soul of the girl in the wheelchair couldn't be mistaken. As for the orange-haired girl wearing a raincoat, they hadn't seen any slip-ups from her or her father yet. Upon hearing this, Takumi associated that father with the legendary sugar daddy, but explaining this to the corpse god would take half a day, so they continued their discussion. Takumi couldn't guess why the calamities, including the fire-spitting bug, were gathering here. Moreover, they were saying crazy things that made the corpse god lose control. The name Sabraman that the fire-spitting bug mentioned was the strongest royal mage of the corpse god's empire. Recalling his early career days, the corpse god was criticized by his master for not having magical talent. The only thing he had was the demon eye and a talented master like her. The corpse god was very combative at that time, so he wanted to climb to the top position of the royal mages. But when he saw Sabraman appear before him, his smile faded, and behind it were tears. In the corpse god's world, Sabraman was no different from a ruler, both powerful and influential. They were all top mages, so it was completely normal for Sabraman to live for 200 or 300 more years, and he didn't want anyone to tarnish his precious past. A gangster promised his boss that he wouldn't allow any mistakes in this case, like the Inspector Hasu Yogi case. His entire group was working under the protection of Sabraman, the person whose biography the corpse god had just shared with his teammates. Underground, a terrorist group was preparing to come to the surface to create a reputation. Their slogan was to turn themselves into bullets to pierce into hearts. But before they could get on television, they were easily beheaded by an assassin named Mamora. He sat on the corpses of the terrorists, chatting with his teammate on the other side who had just sent another group to heaven. Both he and his teammate emerged from the mission without a scratch. Mamora's next mission was in Shinjuku City with his idol, Solite. Finally, Xiaodu managed to call Razin and told him continuously about Shino's abilities. Razin calmly replied, "Has the holy professional mark touched any of your hairs yet? If not, why are you so twisted up?" From the beginning, Razin knew everything, but if he had revealed it to the bodyguard, he would have definitely caused trouble. Xiaodu was stunned when he understood why Razin had told him to protect and trust Shino. Razin himself trusted the person who had saved his child, so he advised Xiaodu to go ask the fake Shino directly. And if the corpse god didn't agree to tell the truth, he himself would bow 180 degrees to apologize to the protagonist. Mamora recognized from afar the kid Xiaodu, whose limbs he had once requested. He greatly admired the stubbornness of the Heli family. Ares, who was standing guard below the corpse god's group's base, also recognized a familiar face. The corpse god was depressed for accidentally harming his brothers when Misaki kicked the door open. She helped the corpse god make a funny face. She had just brought a famous reporter up here. This reporter's nickname was Kacho, a name that left Takumi speechless upon hearing it. This reporter was one of the top journalists. She owned a series of extremely powerful scoops from politics to young idols. She was one of the people the Corpse Gods group should least get involved with. And fortunately, Misaki had brought this character right to their den. Right from the start, the Corpse God showed Kacho that he was a genuine criminal. Luckily, Takumi managed to fix the situation once for the Corpse God. But Kacho wasn't one to be trifled with, as she counter-threatened Takumi about his spy drones that took secret photos. Takumi had sensed that this girl came to expose the informant and the fake fortune teller who were cooperating with each other. This was a battle of wits between two old foxes in their respective fields. What Kacho knew about Takumi was that he was once a genius. He had built an entire software company at the age of 14. But unfortunately, the company was stolen by some bastard competitors. They even forced Takumi's family to voluntarily log out. Speaking of the opportunity to come here for news, Kacho had spent so much effort persuading the editor-in-chief. She also pointed out many pieces of evidence that the Calamities had been visiting the Corpse God's place recently. The protagonist only agreed to let Kacho interview him about fortune-telling matters, but to maintain objectivity, she would ask a neighbor to get his fortune told while she observed. Takumi had instructed Kacho not to touch information about other clients. With her experience in the profession, Kacho had guessed that Solite had a close connection with the Corpse God. There were many other suspicions, including traces of the fire-spitting bug behind them. Suddenly, Kacho became nervous because the amount of information around her was overwhelming. She had tried to extract information about the fire-spitting bug's writing, but fortunately, Seo had managed to cover Misaki's mouth in time. As for Takumi, he slickly claimed these things had been there before. But how could Kacho believe that? The inscribed marks were still very fresh. Lemon had successfully escaped to report to Takaru. The four-eyed man ordered Lemon to live in hiding for a while because many organizations were beginning to eye them. Takaru assigned the mission of tracking Solite to his subordinates in cooperation with the Heli family to surround and capture Solite. The game addict standing in the corner would be assigned the mission of investigating information. They needed to be most cautious about the police because those guys were the real demons. The police director had also started to pay attention to Takaru's action. Kacho was very interested in reporting to the editor-in-chief that there would be many hot news stories soon. Indeed, Mamora had already harvested the head of the unfortunate bartender Nishida, an employee of Kajisa, to fire the opening shot. Kajisa was still leisurely enjoying wine with her employees. Nishida had suddenly taken a day off without notice today, causing his colleagues trouble covering his shift. Kajisa comforted her employees, promising end-of-month diligence bonuses, then went upstairs to send her friendly subordinates to check on Nishida's house. She had a premonition that something bad had happened, so she instructed everyone to go in a large group. It seemed that a police officer in Shinjuku was a spy. He was the Shibuya broker who had colluded with Mamora to kill Nishida. Unexpectedly, what Solite had said was accurate. Now it was probably not a good idea to look for the police. After eliminating Nishida, Mamora also cleaned up the scene thoroughly, leaving nothing behind. Recently, Iwanome had been racking his brains to find traces of Solite. He had to check each camera footage, which gave him a headache. Iwanome suddenly discovered a quite tall man, probably reaching 2 meters. Until now, he still didn't understand why he had come to the building where Shino lived. Could he have extracted some information from Shino's place? While watching the surveillance camera, Yoshida discovered an extremely tall young man. Wasn't this Mamora? But the person walking beside him was actually an acquaintance of Ares. He was related to a case Ares had once cracked down on and was certainly also related to Solite's case in some way. Ares had once dismantled a gang called the Tamdu Children, a gang that Takumi had also once been a part of. He had let escape a person considered the leader of that group, Higuso. Higuso was the person now walking with Mamora. The two were on their way to hide a corpse when they encountered some street thugs blocking the road, intending to rob them. Higuso was grabbed by the collar and punched by these guys. However, there was no panic in his eyes. On the contrary, he asked if they had relationships, then lectured about things related to love, friends, and family. The thugs found this guy talking too much nonsense and were planning to just kill him quickly. Little did they know, it was like bringing a knife to a gunfight. Higuso fed them a few bullets, killing them on the spot. An acquaintance of someone Higuso had once touched was very influential, to the extent that his organization was dismantled. Mamora lamented that a person like this was still roaming freely in society. No wonder the world was in chaos. But that was about to end. After death, Nishida's soul still followed the familiar path to work. He met Yudai, his close friend, at the bartending place. But strangely, no matter how hard he tried to call out, Yudai didn't respond or see him. It was then that Nishida realized he had been beheaded and was dead. Yudai followed his sister Kacho to the corpse god's place to get his fortune told. It was because his sister said there was a small part-time job, so he came, only to find out it was for fortune-telling. Takumi looked through the camera with a headache. This guy was an acquaintance of his sister Kagisa's employee. What was he doing here? Yudai observed everyone's attitudes and sighed with relief, but it seemed no one remembered him, which was a bit hurtful but not a big deal. Yudai really wanted to complain about work, but feared being hanged and beheaded, so he switched to another topic. Since morning, his shoulders had been extremely sore for unknown reasons. Yudai also asked about the whereabouts of Nishida, his missing colleague. It seemed the corpse god also understood the reason for Nishida's disappearance. Nishida was a very important person, like family to him. According to Kagisa's group's investigation, it seemed Nishida had disappeared in some building. Indeed, the corpse god saw Nishida's soul following Yudai. Nishida wanted him to tell Yudai that he had been killed by someone. The corpse god told Yudai that his friend seemed to have gotten involved in some trouble, speaking as euphemistically as possible. Suddenly, the police rushed to Kagisa's place. They wanted to confirm if Nishida was an employee of her establishment. Suddenly, Kagisa realized this method was identical to the Hasu Yogi case 5 years ago. Ziodu was still wondering how he should open up and talk to the corpse god. Just as he returned from shopping, he encountered Iwanome's group standing in front of the house. Iwanome intended to go up and question Shino about the Solite case, but before he could go up, someone else was about to rush up first police from the headquarters. Last night, a serious street robbery had occurred. The suspect was said to be hiding in this building, and superiors had ordered an immediate investigation. He was someone who worked at a nearby bar. Mamora and Taguso stood observing everything. The police burst in while the corpse god's group was in the middle of fortune-telling. They wanted to investigate the building and requested cooperation. Hosuyogi reminded the corpse god that he had a premonition about the basement of this building, just like how he was killed there 5 years ago. Indeed, the corpse god used magic and discovered Nishida's corpse down there. If the police found that thing, their peaceful life would be over. Hearing the corpse god refer to the corpse as a thing, Hosuyogi realized that except for acquaintances and children, he was an extremely cold person. It was because he didn't want to overestimate or underestimate his power that he had set up a limit. Otherwise, he would easily lose everything. The corpse god didn't deny this. It was just that looking at the screaming soul, he felt his hands could reach even further. The police went down to the basement to investigate, but there was nothing there. They thought the suspect had escaped far away. The corpse god had summoned the blockhouses to move the corpse. In this building, there was a secret passage. He had found it before but didn't use it, so he didn't pay attention to it. But through this incident, he realized someone was trying to trap this building. Whether the target was his group or the owner of this building was unclear. Iwanome and Ares wanted to leave but were hesitant because of Kacho. The robbery that the headquarters was poking their noses into made them suspicious. It felt like one of Solite's tricks, but this detail was identical to the case 5 years ago. Iwanome had also received an anonymous tip to come to this building, but apart from Hosuyogi's bloodstains, there was nothing else. If Ares was truly involved in this case, Higuso needed to act more carefully. He wouldn't repeat past mistakes. Ziodu was insulted by Tapo. Though no longer related to the Ziodu family, he was told to try and complete the mission of being a shield for the mistress and then die. No longer related to the family, he was just like a blade of grass by the roadside. Misaki saw that the situation seemed tense, so she came to rescue him. Misaki gave Tapo a piece of advice. There were many people here, so he should be careful. Indeed, Shinjuku was complex with all kinds of people. Mamora had thought it would be boring coming here, but he was having quite a bit of fun now. Kacho at the editorial office was being scolded by the editor-in-chief. The corpse god case she was following had become too dangerous. The editor-in-chief wanted her to withdraw from this case to preserve her life. Of course, Kacho didn't agree. The editor-in-chief had to concede and let her continue working. However, she was only allowed to gather news about fortune-telling matters. Finally, Seo asked Ziodu to gather rough precious stones to help the protagonist strengthen his power. This was also considered a favor for saving her timid uncle on her behalf. Xiaodu, who had been eavesdropping, suddenly lost track of the conversation. Why was this impersonator the benefactor of Razan's favorite child? Takumi was still figuring out how to deal with Nishida's corpse. The mysterious disappearance of his colleague would make young Yudai confused for many days to come. It was only now that the corpse god learned Yudai was Kagisa's subordinate. While they were discussing enthusiastically, Takumi suddenly had to slip away quickly. Even at this hour, the cursed duo from the life safety room still came to visit. Iwanome walked straight to the corpse god to ask why Soulite had come here. This Iwanome was quite desperate, so he directly asked the protagonist how to contact his senior, Hasuyogi. The corpse god was upset with Iwanome because he dared not to believe in his fortune-telling. The protagonist knew Iwanome was eager, but revealing his own secrets to too many people might one day become a double-edged sword that the corpse god couldn't control. The corpse god followed Hasuyogi's advice and still suggested the blonde-haired man go back and research the paper from before. On Takumi's side, thinking he had escaped from the duo Iwanome and Ares, he would be safe from trouble. But life isn't a dream. As soon as he heard the doorbell, Takumi saw his friend Higuso waiting outside. Before he could say anything, Mamora had already placed his long sword at Takumi's neck. Takumi was being captured and was about to meet his end with his old teammate. Higuso brought out several pens and probed how far Takumi had investigated Nishida's case. The first pen was stuck into Takumi's thigh. Making the opponent feel pain was the easiest way to extract accurate information. The next pen was stuck into Takumi's thigh, making him writhe in pain. The Rabbit King Higuso knew that fear of pain was Takumi's biggest weakness, so he stuck a few more pens to ensure he would extract information about Kagisa. But unexpectedly, Misaki had broken through the glass door to save him. Kagisa's teammate had warned Misaki when he saw Takumi potentially in danger. With her game-hacking strength, Misaki temporarily pushed back Mamora. The two sides continuously fought until Mamora decided to counterattack. With 20 years of experience in the profession, Misaki easily jumped into the air to dodge, but everything had been in his calculation. He had dodged Misaki's iron rod and cut her into two pieces. The scene was so horrifying that the cowardly Higuso took the opportunity to inject a sedative and carry Takumi elsewhere. Before moving, he reported this matter to someone and lightly mentioned the name Saberman. But Misaki's fate wasn't yet sealed because the corpse god had upgraded her race thanks to the precious stones. From an undead, she had now become a blood-sucking demon. And this was how the protagonist protected his teammates from calamities. Xiaodu was also following the car waiting for Takumi to leave. Meanwhile, Misaki had fully recovered and jumped straight onto Higuso's car. 10 years ago, Kagisa had once tried to bring a smile to poor Misaki, who had just lost her family. Misaki recalled the moment when Jimba attacked her parents' car while grinning like he had struck gold. Since then, harvesting criminals' heads with a bright smile had become her trademark. However, just as she latched onto the car roof, Mamora stabbed up through the roof, making Misaki lose her balance. She immediately spread her wings and glided after Higuso's car in excitement. Finally, Misaki had found joy in saving people instead of slicing someone. Takumi continued to be interrogated. This time, he was more surprised when the tall man before him was a member of the Akaza family. This was one of the most dangerous assassin families that everyone had to avoid. Higuso also knew about the Heli family's assassin living with the Corpse Gods group. Who else could it be but Xiaodu? The person being mentioned was monitoring the developments from above. Xiaodu had actually just come to Takumi's house by chance to install listening devices to gather information about Nishida's corpse. Little did he expect to have the opportunity to face the person who had once asked for his limbs. Below, Takumi was continuously being mentally tortured. Higuso knew his friend was once a good person, but after being deceived many times, he wore a simulation mask to escape his miserable life. Theory was enough. Now it was time for Higuso to point a gun at Takumi's head. Kagisa at the bar was certain that her younger brother had been taken away, but she wasn't worried about Takumi revealing the organization's secrets. Now he had something more important to protect than his petty life. Indeed, even though he had taken a bullet to the leg along with several threats from Higuso, Takumi remained determined not to say a word. Sooner or later, he would be resurrected by the corpse god into some kind of creature. Takumi's resilience surprised Higuso. He had to change his tactics by pouring a packet of soy sauce into his friend's wound, then using a screwdriver to twist it a few times, but none of these could pry open Takumi's mouth. His mistake was mentioning that he would take Seo hostage if he accidentally killed Takumi. and so Xiaodu was forced to save the keyboard hero and challenge those who dared to harm the Shinomiya family. Iwanome and Ares were also reporting to Habaki about their visit to the corpse god for investigation. He had promised not to cause trouble because Ares was accompanying him. Soulite was now meeting with the police director, Taku. He announced that he was preparing to expose the true face of the local police. At the warehouse where Takumi had just been saved by the angel Xiaodu from the gun barrel of Higuso, he still couldn't believe that Xiaodu was a member of the infamous Heli assassin family. Xiaodu lunged at Mamoru and continuously lashed with iron whips from his 2 robot hands. These mosquito swatting moves could be easily blocked by Mamoru. Mamoru's sister was the one who had turned Xiaodu from a fully limbed human into a transforming robot. Mamoru's family had long read the Heli family's assassination techniques like a book. Mamoru thought Xiaodu was trembling, but the truth was he was concentrating power in his legs. In just a moment, Xiaodu was moving at the speed of light behind Mamoru, but this monster still had time to react. Xiaodu had to fly up and blow out all the lights to reduce Mamoru's vision partially. However, in the darkness, he could still resist the bullet-like speed of his opponent. At the moment when he was most distracted, Xiaodu shot light into his eyes, temporarily blinding him. These cat tricks wouldn't be enough to defeat Mamoru. Otherwise, Xiaodu wouldn't have been overwhelmed by his family to the point of having to use prosthetic limbs. He had been figured out and then grabbed by the leg and thrown into the air by Mamoru. In just another second, he would have parts of his body requested by the Akaza family for a second time. Suddenly, a familiar laugh rang out. Mamoru was kicked flying into the wall. Misaki had to observe whether Xiaodu was an ally or enemy before saving him. Higuso, who had been laughing while watching the fight, now began to feel a chill down his spine. Clearly, this lunatic had just been cut into 2 pieces by Mamoru. Yet she was standing here as if nothing had happened. Mamoru quickly got up, tearing his skirt to prepare for a proper fight. In just a split second, he had nearly cut Xiaodu with his long sword. Misaki, still as reckless as ever, charged straight in to fight the monster head-on. Feeling this opponent was a bit tough to handle, Misaki turned to Xiaodu to suggest cooperation. There was something Mamoru found puzzling. Logically, his attacks should have made several cuts on her stomach by now. Even Xiaodu hadn't been able to sense the heartbeat of his reckless ally. It was all thanks to the corpse god who had just given her powers, allowing Misaki to gain the ability to resurrect and transform her body into drops. The 2 joined forces to fight against Mamoru. He was a dangerous person because he could create illusions with his fighting stance. The crazy Misaki also wanted to try hacking the attack range like her opponent, so she launched her club with an extra arm. The attack was so unexpected that it was enough to give Mamoru a large wound in the stomach. At home, Hasuyogi suddenly tapped on the corpse god's thigh to ask him to do something. At the police station, Soulite was still trying to confuse Taku, but his face remained unchanged. Iwanome, while analyzing clues with Ares, was interrupted by a phone call. He picked up and heard a very peculiar voice, but Hasuyogi's style was unmistakable. Kacho was also researching the events happening around the corpse god's building. Somehow, she accidentally found information about boss Kajisa, who was also the owner of the building. And above all, she had once been involved in a kidnapping case. Fortunately, she was rescued by Inspector Hasuyogi and returned. Iwanome still couldn't believe he was hearing his beloved senior's voice again. It was all thanks to the corpse god allowing Hasuyogi to borrow the body of a pigeon to chat. He had tried to explain his current situation, but how could Iwanome imagine this scene? The main purpose of Hasuyogi calling his junior was to explain the note he had warned about. The enemy who had once asked for his life would act once more. The person he had put on the suspect list before his death was someone inside the police force. Upon hearing this shocking information, Iwanome still couldn't believe it was true. Meanwhile, Soulite was still interrogating the person he believed to be the mole within the police. Actually, Taku couldn't understand why Soulite would guess that someone like him was the traitor. That's right, because he wasn't thinking anything in his head and had just come to randomly question a big figure like the police director. The duo Misaki and assassin Xiaodu had just finished discussing their tactics. Misaki was designated to fend off Mamoru. The skills of a top assassin allowed him to quickly grab Misaki's neck. Just as he was celebrating, Misaki had separated her body, allowing Xiaodu to deliver several fatal stabs straight into Mamoru. He was even careful to add a bit of electricity to ensure the enemy was completely dead. Takumi suddenly remembered that the Rabbit King Higuso had disappeared from this place. He had just smelled trouble and fled straight to the underground railway, abandoning his teammate. He had to report the strange things he had witnessed to someone. Hasuyogi instructed Iwanom not to trust anyone at the police station, not even the close members of his team. Hearing all the information from his senior made Iwanom somewhat relieved because he believed Hasuyogi was still breathing. As soon as he hung up, Iwanom still told Ares about the mole within the organization. He was still ready to trust the members of the special team under his command to the end. While they were chatting, Solite called. Somehow, he had learned about their recent phone conversation. The culprit was none other than Commissioner Habaki, the person Iwanom always regarded as his benefactor. The fire-spitting bug's song also echoed throughout the police station, signaling that he was present here too. Mamora's sister had also begun to act to save her god-forsaken brother. Solite had just been chatting intimately with the police chief, and conveniently, he had also overheard the chief's conversation with the general store. The police chief had asked the general store to record all phone calls within the police station, including Iwanom's calls and Habaki's calls with the Shibuya matchmaker. The police chief had anticipated everything, but except for Hasuyogi, the chief gave Solite the information he wanted. How he used that information was up to him. Additionally, he also demanded Iwanom's phone number, which explained how he was able to call and scare Iwanom earlier. Iwanom wanted to question Habaki further, but suddenly some police officers, as if under a spell, converged on them, and burning words began to appear on the wall. They appeared not just at Iwanom's location, but also where Misaki and Zio-do were. The words kept singing a song that sounded like a funeral dirge. Mamora's sister suddenly appeared, probably because she had been calling the kid many times with no response. Maria only said a few sentences, and the people in raincoats dispersed to let her pass. There was no need to act against them because even if she smashed them, she couldn't eliminate them all. They targeted Habaki with extreme hatred. Solite revealed to the police chief about the fire-spitting bug. The fire-spitting bug was one person, but also not one person, more like a magician or someone with superpowers. Iwanom recognized something unusual and quickly told Ares to get a fire extinguisher. It seemed that these fire-spitting bugs had projected something similar to a laser at a point to make it burn, including the words on the wall. It wasn't clear how they did it, but there must be a way. Nothing is impossible. Were all the enemies Iwanom had faced before denials of the words impossible? Perhaps the real monster was about to arrive. Takumi wanted to leave quickly. Zio-do sensed something approaching, possibly an enemy. Sister Maria suddenly appeared behind Zio-do and conveniently cut off his prosthetic arm. She had cut off his limbs many years ago and said if he became her brother, she would return them to him. His first mission should have been a simple one, but that small prey had also been targeted by others. What he needed to do was kill those in the building. Unfortunately, Maria was present there, and by the time he realized it, his limbs were gone. She had even provided first aid so he wouldn't die. If he found the Heli family too easy, he should come to her. She really wanted a brother like him. Maria still hadn't given up on her intention, even though Zio-do had pledged allegiance to the Shinomiya family. Thinking Zio-do was the one who defeated Mamora, Maria was surprised to find Misaki right above her head. Misaki charged forward to slap the sister. Unexpectedly, Maria used her teeth to block. Maria sliced Misaki in half, but of course it didn't work. The two got acquainted after that greeting. The sister was very impressed with the previous move and earnestly recruited Sister Misaki. But unfortunately, playing around like this would cause brother Mamora to die. The three quickly reclaimed Mamora and left. Misaki's group had to let them go. Habaki had used some powder and completely transformed. His strength also became overwhelming, pushing Iwanom far away with just one hit. According to him, in just a little while, that person would cross the hole. On one side was Habaki high on drugs, on the other were police officers being manipulated. The two were caught in a dangerous situation. The corpse god at home was still waiting for Takumi's return. Thunder and lightning continued to crash in the sky. In his world, the magic of thunder spirits was impossible to use. It was no different than suicide. Yet there were geniuses who had succeeded. On some building's rooftop, someone was standing in the rain to absorb the thunder spirit. The way he spoke suggested he knew something about the corpse god's old world, and knew a lot at that. Habaki had been someone who always helped and guided Iwanom since he started his career. He was a father who had lost his daughter, so he always strived to live. But now, this person stood before him with a completely different demeanor, frenzied and dark. It turned out that everything had been a lie. He had lost his daughter in exchange for his position today. At that moment, Yoshida arrived and rescued the two of them. Yoshida had seen a suspicious police officer and had summoned Special Team 3. Habaki was a suspect in the Hasuyogi case, but he was mumbling about something else. He had been talking to someone from beginning to end, and suddenly the lights went out. Habaki rushed forward to grapple with Iwanome's group. Just when they were about to subdue him, a police officer suddenly appeared with a pistol aimed at Yoshida. After helping Habaki escape, he used the gun to commit suicide, and the lights came back on. Everyone who had seemed bewitched a moment ago was now clear-headed again. This scene reminded Iwanome of something he thought was fictional, but who would have guessed it was real? The fire-spitting bug was one person, but also not one person. He was a hypnotist with abilities beyond human categories. The police split into two routes to search for Habaki. Habaki was now on the rooftop meeting someone he called Master, the leader of the Saberman organization. He was very grateful for his efforts. Habaki had contributed a lot to the organization, even offering his daughter as an experimental subject. He believed his daughter would be very happy in the other world, but the leader's intention wasn't to thank him. He intended to abandon him. However, someone wanted to meet him again. The other world was for the dead, but his daughter hadn't died. She was still very much alive, muscles rippling, punching her heartless father far away. To be precise, the girl was just an illegitimate child, and Habaki just wanted to get rid of her to be free of debt. Sora, now named Aya, was the only one who survived those experiments. She had asked the leader to save Habaki so she could personally execute the father who had abandoned her. She now even had a higher position than him. None of this could compare to what she had endured over the past 10 years. She had once thought she would forgive him if he visited her just once. Who would have thought he would be so cold-blooded? At that moment, Habaki was killed by an assassin. The leader allowed Sora to do whatever she wanted. Without hesitation, she jumped to the building with the assassin. The two assassin siblings tried to escape, but it was too late. They tried to shoot Sora, but she dodged every shot and even broke their guns. Fortunately, the two siblings had someone come to their rescue. Kagisa had anticipated this. Too caught up in the fight, Sora didn't notice the despicable boss had slipped away. Kagisa was now at the corpse god's place to inquire about news. She advised him to be careful. If the person who killed him learned about the corpse god, there would surely be big trouble. Through surveillance, Takeru knew that the corpse god and Seo were approaching Kagisa. He only instructed Tapo to monitor, not to act. Only if there was a fight should he intervene. Kagisa wanted to entrust him with some work, so she wanted the corpse god to accompany her. Seo would stay at home and be protected. Iwanome was reporting the incident to the police chief. The police station had been in chaos all day. The police chief had suspected Habaki for a long time. 5 years ago, when they were about to corner him, all evidence mysteriously disappeared. Kagisa and the corpse god went to the rooftop to talk. He used a little magic so that only people on the rooftop could see the soul of the recently deceased. Who else but Habaki? Kagisa had an official conversation with him. It turned out that in the past, he had plotted to make everyone think she and Hasuyogi had killed each other. Kagisa had completely erased his body. Hasuyogi hadn't expected Habaki to be dead already. The damned girl had ruined his plan, but he absolutely refused to reveal who was behind it all. The corpse god had to intervene, using a technique to guide the inner mind to make him confess. He claimed he had offered his illegitimate child to Saberman. Habaki called the corpse god the mage behind the sky. It seemed the leader was looking for him. Habaki's memories were transmitted into the corpse god's mind. Hasuyogi also saw it, interspersed with fragmented memories of the corpse god, memories of a father who had stabbed him just to get money and drugs. The corpse god decided to follow his instincts to extract information from this bastard. Back then, if it hadn't been for his master's rescue, he wouldn't have kept his soul, wouldn't have continued to live. Fortunately, he still had friends beside him to comfort him. Just as the corpse god was about to assassinate Habaki, a hand suddenly stopped him. It was His Majesty, the person he considered his best friend. After the recent riot, Iwanome had a meeting with his team. The media seemed to have caught wind, so they needed to limit their exposure. Iwanome wanted to catch Habaki before he escaped abroad, but they didn't know he had already been killed miserably. The corpse god's best friend suddenly appeared. The corpse god seemed to have broken the chains compared to 100 years ago. Because he had appeared on his own accord, His Majesty would soon disappear. His friend didn't think about revenge, but that didn't mean he had given up hatred to become a saint. That year, he had taken the corpse god's place to handle his hatred, to keep his hands clean. This time was the same. Crushing Habaki was left to his majesty. Having finished the job for the corpse god, he vanished. The corpse god wanted to create a peaceful world where his majesty wouldn't need to taint himself. That's why he needed to delve deeper. Higuso was on the run, but unfortunately, he was surrounded by the fire-spitting bugs minions. Misaki's group had returned home, and Zyudo was being repaired by Seo using bandages. Seo knew he carried a secret. She also knew he always protected everyone and gave him a hug. Kajisa called to check on Takumi. She even assigned Kazumi to prepare medicine and treat him. Takumi really didn't want it. Looking at that horrifying scene, who would? But in the end, he was still forced, truly fearing for his life. The corpse god was quite curious about Kajisa and Habaki's story. She had sought out Habaki because she had infiltrated the internal police network. Someone had helped her place GPS on him. That was the godfather Toa. He had helped her only because this case could go beyond the scope. He wanted Team 3 to remain on the right path until they were mature enough. Iwanome instructed everyone to find out about the people Habaki had met. He wanted to invite Hasuyogi to help. They needed to unveil the mystery of each secret case. The corpse god asked Kajisa if she wanted to say anything to Hasuyogi if he found his soul. Her current form as a broker succeeding him, he would certainly not like it. But she had no regrets. She was content with her current self. So if he returned, she could only say goodbye. Iwanome, on the contrary, wanted to continue to accompany and work with Hasuyogi. Higuso was taken to a strange place. In front of him was Soulite. Takumi was being treated. Seeing this scene, the corpse god became even more determined to delve deeper into this world. To bring a peaceful life to everyone, that was the only way. Soulite confronted Higuso and the fire-spitting bug. The fire-spitting bug had always tried to burn those related to the Saberman organization. But this method was becoming increasingly limited. So the fire-spitting bug wanted to use Soulite, who had exposed Habaki. Thinking this Soulite was just a third-rate magician, who would have thought he also had brains. Higuso wanted to be released because he didn't understand anything. Soulite sensed this guy had already killed about a dozen people, so he wouldn't release him anytime soon. News of Misaki's group returning injured reached Takeru's ears. It seemed their opponent was not a small fry. Their opponent had gradually extended its reach to them. Since the afternoon, several bodyguards had been continuously attacked unexpectedly and had their phones stolen. Zyudo called to report to the old master about what he had done and his injuries. One of his arms was completely damaged. The corpse god offered to repair his arm, but Zyudo seemed resistant, unwilling to trust him. The corpse god had no choice but to explain everything to him. But before that, they would fight. His opponent wasn't the corpse god, but a double-fanged tiger. Zyudo's battle was live-streamed directly to the old master. If the corpse god intended to reveal the secret to Zyudo, his peaceful life would become increasingly distant. The corpse god stopped the battle, but the two tigers seemed to like Zyudo, licking him until he was completely wet. Zyudo went to take a bath and then showed the corpse god the joints of his prosthetic arm. Who would have known that his recent battle was to adjust his new arm? The corpse god cast a spell to create a new arm for Zyudo from the right arm of the thunder dragon. In exchange for this arm, the corpse god wanted Zyudo to become his ally. The corpse god had made a 200-year pact with the thunder dragon long ago. The dragon's body that he had obtained could be incorporated into weapons or used to make medicine. For Zyudo, the corpse god had connected his fate with the dragon. Seo was chatting with Takumi to kill time. She wanted to find out how Misaki had deviated from the original blood-sucking demon to discover the advantages and disadvantages of her body. The corpse god trusted Zyudo, which was why he entrusted the dragon to him. Therefore, he also hoped Zyudo would become his ally. The real Shino was wriggling inside the stuffed shark toy. Soulite was talking with the fire-spitting bug about what he was looking for. Ancestors who transcended normalcy, the illegitimate child, and the mage behind the sky. That was the obstacle to this world. It was something close to what Soulite desired. Everything that had happened to him surely had some connection. Iwanome was working hard to find more information about the case, digging through old files. Before Iwanome became a police officer, the fire-spitting bug had already appeared. The Saberman leader group came to the corpse god's place for fortune-telling. A guest showed them a video of wiggling arms. He believed this wasn't created by Soulite. His name was Mikoto, and he was a forensic expert working for Iwanome. Xiaodu was shocked to learn that Hasuyogi was the moving pen. At this point, he told the corpse god about what Soulite had said to him on the rooftop. Hasuyogi didn't understand what was happening. After all, what was Soulite's scheme? The corpse god welcomed the next guest, a leader calling himself Cyber. He walked in, immediately making the corpse god feel overwhelmed. He had never seen so many death spirits concentrated on one person. Even if this person had killed 1 million people on the battlefield, it wouldn't be this many. Moreover, death spirits with resentment were only a small part. The rest were desires. The corpse god didn't want to let him see he was tense, so he cast a little spell on his face. From checking the phones of the bodyguards around this building, the leader knew they existed to protect Shino. As for what the corpse god said, he didn't know whether it was true or a scam. Soulite was busy setting up equipment to livestream Higuzazu. Higuzazu really didn't know what Cyberman was. Cyber asked the corpse god about the fate that had passed through 100 years. His friends from 100 years ago had created enmity and been hunted. He wanted to meet them again to understand the reason for everything. This person was different from the children who stayed with the corpse god back then, the ones who were killed for being with him. The corpse god used magic on Cyber. He didn't detect it. He didn't possess demon eyes, so he couldn't see it. The corpse god tried to touch Cyber's heart and soul. The death spirits tried to stop him. The corpse god sensed the density of magic. The level of a royal mage, no joke. Was this really a person of this empire? The leader was also suspicious of the corpse god. A person born normally in this world, why would he have such abilities? Or was he a substitute? The corpse god was trying to delve deeper into this person's soul when a little girl suddenly pushed the door open to stop him. He saw elemental stones on her head. The instructions suggested that this place was extremely dangerous. The leader needed to leave this place immediately. If it was one person, it could be coincidence. But here were 3 people with soul colors tinged with the colors of his old world. What should the corpse god do? Should he stall them? Suddenly, Sora was sent flying by the bodyguard Tapo. Earlier, when Kacho was thinking about whether she would get any interesting news today, she encountered Tapo in front of the corpse god's building. Tapo had called Takaru for permission and was allowed to follow Kacho to probe for information. When both of them stepped into the building, an uneasy feeling made Kacho shiver. The corpse god's clients walking out like soulless corpses made Tapo feel a familiarity from his family. He hurried to check the situation but was intercepted by Misaki for a chat. While Misaki was conversing with Kacho, Tapo suddenly delivered a palm strike that sent Sora flying into the wall before she could understand what was happening. He recognized her as the person who had attacked the bodyguards around the corpse god's building. Sora also felt strange because clearly when she acted, she had been very professional but was still detected. It was all thanks to the scent on the clothes. The Heli family's assassins had a distinctive odor that clung to their enemies' bodies. Combined with Tapo's sensitive nose, there was no escape. The commotion outside had attracted everyone's attention. In this tense situation, the corpse god calmly asked Misaki to carry Kacho out of the building. Taking advantage of Tapo's distraction from the light of Kacho's camera, Cyber rushed like a wind, delivering a magical palm strike that sent Tapo flying to the side. The movement and use of magic just now by Cyber reminded the corpse god of the first royal mage Sabraman. The genius recognized by his master, only he could easily steal the magic of spirits to infuse into himself. If it were a normal person, they would be twisted like an earthworm by that very magic and explode. Despite such talent, Sabraman had always desired to be like the corpse god because he was favored by souls and witches who hated humans. Back to the scene, Cyber thought it was time they should stop making noise at the fortune teller's workplace. He gave the protagonist a necklace containing rare, hard-to-find precious stones as compensation for the fight. The corpse god was about to refuse the item when Tapo jumped up and threw a knife toward Cyber's group. Sora blocked it for her boss, and the wound healed immediately. This terrifying recovery ability reminded the corpse god of the Imperial Assassination Team's abilities. Cyber was quite surprised by the fortune teller's calmness after witnessing everything. After hearing the corpse god's slick explanation, they all hugged each other and fled through the window. The wave had passed, so Takumi dared to stick his face out to inquire about the situation. The corpse god confirmed that Cyber's identity was certainly the illegitimate children that the fire-spitting bug was hunting. The way they used magic and their faces were very similar to Saberman, although Cyber's face was still quite plump and their soul colors were different. On the way back, Sora kept complaining about being prevented from having fun by her boss. But the reason Cyber left in such a hurry was that someone was using his name Saberaman as a passport. The old men in their organization were going crazy over a clip of the monster Soulite that had just been uploaded to social media. The main character in the clip was Higuzo, spreading knowledge about Saberaman to everyone. As for the transaction of giving the precious stone-studded necklace to the corpse god, it wasn't much of a loss for Cyber. The corpse god had just discovered that the real Shino had been taken away by the red-haired young man's group. Actually, it wasn't that Cyber knew the true identity of Shino and took him along. It was because during the conversation, his spirit became interested in the shark beside the fortune teller. Cyber's speculation was that the corpse god was a visitor from another world. He might be under the control of a mage from another world. The spirit showed interest in this thing, so it could be a catalyst. Perhaps that mage gave him instructions through this stuffed toy. Then he had to study this thing and also protect it from being burned by the bugs. The corpse god had sent his demon eye to follow, so he wasn't worried. Tapo came to ask the corpse god to tell his fortune, but actually, it was to listen to Takeru's call. Takeru explained the situation of the earlier fight to him. Takeru wanted to ask him to divine the identity of those people. Although he wasn't very sure, he would try. Higuzo looked at the result of what Soulite had done and was furious. It had been a long time since he had yelled like this. He was just an errand boy. He didn't know anything, so why show his face? Sister Maria also knew about this, but what she cared about was only the kid Ziodu and the cute little Misaki. The fire-spitting bug had been active for over 100 years. Therefore, Iwanom's investigation direction changed. They needed to investigate why the fire-spitting bug was hostile towards Saberaman. The police found a similar case 100 years ago of fire in Shinjuku. 16 people died, mostly children locked in a place resembling a connected cell. Higuzo's video left everyone speechless. The corpse god didn't understand Soulite's plan. Spreading the name Saberaman throughout the world would only make it harder to distinguish between truth and falsehood, wouldn't it? What was that guy's plan? Regarding fortune-telling, the corpse god needed preparation. He wanted to schedule it for 3 days later, but Takeru was quite suspicious. Was this guy planning to negotiate with those foreigners? He ordered his people to grasp the corpse god's movements and find out his purpose. Cyber's group was called out by a group of elders' henchmen. These guys even pointed guns at him and his attendants. The price was death. The corpse god's group hadn't dared to rescue Shark Shino yet because the opponent was too dangerous, especially that petite girl Lulu who was possessed by a spirit. Just one of the three of them would be enough to destroy an entire city. Indeed, Lulu's power alone had already killed quite a few people. Lulu was quite depressed because she had accidentally harmed too many people after her recent battle. Cyber comforted her that thanks to Lulu's pleading, the others were only seriously injured but hadn't died. They were attacked by people in their own organization because they feared Cyber's group would leak information to the fire-spitting bug. As for Cyber, with the criterion of fearing nothing, he even wanted to attract the fire-spitting bug to concentrate in one place to clean up once and for all. Higuzo was very curious about why the monster Soulite was at the corpse god's building, and whether the giant hands wiggling in the sky in the clip were Soulite's trick or not. Soulite still chose to evade these questions. According to the Rabbit King Higuzo, Soulite's excessive fun had turned him into the center of all the incidents in Shinjuku. Perhaps next time if an assassin came knocking, no dummy would be able to save his life. At the hospital, Mamoru was trying to suppress both pain and laughter just because he saw Higuzo's comedic clip. He decided to forgive the traitor, but was also a bit jealous because he hadn't had the chance to get the idol's autograph. Meanwhile, Maria had found Bravo's guard post to greet Ziodu's relative. Bravo had tried to send a message to notify Takeru, but was stopped by Maria. Unexpectedly, the one trapped here was Maria as she was handcuffed by Bravo. Unfortunately for Maria, she had found the only person in the family who cared about brother Ziodu. In the past, when the whole family was meeting to decide the fate of Ziodu, who had just returned crippled from his first mission, a few troublemaking uncles let their mouths go too far. Those people, one had half of his lower jaw cut off, and the other had an arm cut off. Because of the family's mistreatment, Bravo felt grateful to Maria for helping the younger brother escape from there. But to compete for the right to be Ziodu's sister, wait until the next life to think about it. So the two strongest people of the two families prepared to fight for the right to be Ziodu's sister. Meanwhile, he was still researching precious stones with the corpse god to prepare for the upcoming total combat. The corpse god had planned to inform Razan that Shino had been kidnapped, But unfortunately, it was his hospital admission day, so he still couldn't report. Xiaodu now felt guilty toward the godfather for not fulfilling his responsibility. The corpse god being kidnapped made him feel very guilty. The old master still didn't know because today was his periodic health checkup day. He confided to the corpse god the reason why he hated Shino so much, simply because he wanted to become the old master's son. He was just jealous of Shino. The blood connection was something he didn't have. The corpse god had been sold for money, so he was also jealous of such connections. But there were connections that weren't simply blood. This time, he would create a peaceful world for everyone. Finally, Takeru had to summon Lemon to prepare for the total battle in 3 days. At the corpse god's group's base, Takumi also had to work day and night to continuously monitor the movements of important figures. The person who gave him the most headache was none other than the show-off Saint Solite with his new tricks. Everyone at the police station was certain it was caused by Solite, but only Iwanome thought differently. According to him, these tricks were a bit too meaningless to be like Solite. Indeed, the ones behind these tricks were the Mage Cybers group. They came to meet their idol and revealed to Solite the true symbol of the Empire. The corpse god was sitting drawing something when Misaki came to ask about the friend he had summoned in front of Kajisa. The protagonist, following his master's advice, treasured any friend who came into his life, even for a short time. The corpse god also sensed that the 3 people who had taken Shino away seemed to have been attracted by someone from another world like him. Misaki had encouraged him that since his arrival here, everything he had done was very positive. Having known each other for so long, this was the first time he heard something that sounded good. The group would together reclaim the real Shino from the hands of the kidnappers. Iwanome and Ares had now found the house where the horrific accident had occurred 100 years ago. The house had somehow been bought by a merchant at a quite high price and had been thoroughly renovated. Iwanome's sixth sense told him that the fire-spitting bug and Solite were cooperating, so they would also investigate from here. The monster Solite, before accepting the cooperation proposal from Cyber, wanted to see if Cyber could escape the fate of being burned by the fire-spitting bug. In a flash, the fire-spitting bug had gathered around to prepare to burn alive Cyberman's illegitimate children. The fire-spitting bug burned everything around. At this rate, if they didn't run, they would be burned to death. Cyber confronted the fire-spitting bug. Cyber's family had experimented on humans to pass down power 100 years ago. They had burned 18 experimental subjects to keep the secret, but the number of bodies found was 16. This meant there were survivors, and they were twins at that. To complete their revenge, they didn't mind harming innocent people. How was that any different from those elders? The fire-spitting bug didn't deny that he was the embodiment of evil. After completing his revenge, he would self-immolate. The fire-spitting bug didn't take revenge foolishly. He disappeared en masse. Just now was only to probe the opponent's strength. Solite was caught and interrogated. Cyber asked him the reason for appearing at Shino's building. Solite performed a few misdirection tricks to escape from Sora's hands and disappeared. Until now, Cyber's magic could only enhance the physical and mental. His miserable origin in this world. The ability and magic of the talented Sabraman from the other world should have appeared, but he was just a failure, an illegitimate child of Sabraman. The first time he sensed magical power was when the corpse god touched his soul. Cyber wanted to return to his homeland, or if he couldn't return, he hoped this world would have something interesting for him to stay. The general store contacted Sabraman. It seemed he was researching Shino's lineage, especially information about his mother. Iwanome and Ares found documents about the fire that occurred 100 years ago in the house they had visited yesterday. According to the strange young man they met yesterday, he was managing the house at the owner's request. In fact, they had obtained confirmation from the homeowner, and what the young man said was true. This made Iwanome even more determined to find the truth hidden behind the name Sabraman. Meanwhile, at headquarters, Kajisa decided to stand back and observe to fully understand the corpse god's abilities. Takeru had also received information that the 3 girls had contact with a man who looked like Solite last night. They also had people with umbrellas bearing strange symbols. The appointment time was approaching, but the corpse god was still confused, thinking about whether Takeru would understand that the 3 people weren't a threat to the Shinomiya family and would cooperate with them. Before he could finish his sentence, Misaki interrupted, saying he was talking nonsense and asked what he planned to do after rescuing Shino. But the corpse god had already figured it out. He would restrain the spirit. Finally, it was her and Takumi's turn, so Misaki couldn't help but smile eagerly. But the current concern was how to distinguish which was the real Shino. It would be difficult if things got chaotic at a crucial moment, and the name, the Corpse God, was also too difficult to pronounce. At this point, the Corpse God revealed the truth. He had another name, but it was tied to a painful past, so he didn't want to mention it. Now was a good opportunity for him to tell everyone. Before he could finish, the Corpse God suddenly received news that the two girls had taken the real Shino elsewhere. Two of them had left the hotel, while the remaining ones' whereabouts were unknown. Suddenly, he heard footsteps in the corridor, and the Corpse God immediately became vigilant. The remaining person had arrived as promised. The door opened, and his smiling face peered in, looking completely harmless. He had deliberately used the tunnel to avoid detection. Everyone immediately became cautious, but he had only come to befriend the Corpse God, then delusionally claimed that in this world, only he could understand the Corpse God's feelings and powers. The more he spoke, the more bewildered the Corpse God became, not understanding anything. It wasn't until he learned that Shino's birth, or rather this body, was a descendant of the tribe possessing the spirit eye that the Corpse God was stunned. He heard a name he thought would never be mentioned again. At this point, he also understood why he had reincarnated into this world. Shino's mother was the person the Corpse God had most wanted to save in his previous life, but couldn't. The Corpse God remembered the only decisive condition when he activated the reincarnation technique, to enter the newly deceased body of someone of the same tribe as himself. He just didn't understand why it connected with his mother who had come to this world. The other person's words made the Corpse God fall into contemplation. By the time he understood everything, the conversation had taken a completely different direction. The Corpse God angrily demanded the return of his brother, or rather, Shino. These words made the red-haired young man confused, but he immediately understood the problem. The body was Shino's, but the soul was someone else's, and he realized Shino's soul was in the missing shark. But that wasn't important. Now was the main issue. If the soul inside Shino also came from another world and had something to do with the seal printed on the young man's clothes, he thought both of them should join forces to eliminate the bugs. But the Corpse God wasn't afraid of that. He only asked if the young man knew who Arius was. Unexpectedly, he actually knew and became excited, thinking the Corpse God and he were acquaintances. It turned out this red-haired young man was Arius's son, who had come to invite the Corpse God to join his organization. But he immediately refused, yet the red-haired young man wouldn't accept it and kept wanting to force the Corpse God to demonstrate his power. If that was the case, he wouldn't be polite anymore. A giant bone arm immediately appeared, holding him tight, and countless grotesque skulls emerged from the ground. The young man instantly recognized this as death spirit magic and realized the Corpse God's true identity, a high-level mage of the Imperial royal family. The red-haired young man had just finished speaking when he was thrown out the window. This was also when the plan began. Meanwhile, the fire-spitting bugs had been found by Iwanome and his associates. Iwanome wasn't confused. Fire-spitting bug wasn't the name of an individual. In the documents Hasu Yogi left behind, that house had conducted experiments on humans. The murder and detention case that the group called Sabraman had committed after completing experiments on humans, and the two survivors, were the origin of the fire-spitting bug. This was an experiment planting different rules than normal into people. In other words, the fire-spitting bug inside them was a fake personality sewn through hypnosis. The first fire-spitting bug had died. He had somehow produced his consciousness in this world. Although he couldn't charge these people with arson, Iwanome would certainly not let them start another fire. Over at the Corpse God's side, they thought the person kicked out was the red-haired young man, but unexpectedly, it was the protagonist being pushed out of the building by him. The battle began like this. They thought the red-haired man was just a novice, but unexpectedly, he had some real strength. But his techniques were simply the release of magical power. At this point, the red-haired man's teammates also came to help, but were held back by the Corpse God's teammates. Lulu, wanting to pray for Cyber's help, realized she was targeted by Misaki. The red-haired young man wanted to change the world, but the Corpse God didn't. He wanted to let his brother's world remain as it was. It was peaceful, so let it stay peaceful. On another side, others were also intensely confronting their enemies. Looking at the scene before him, the Corpse God realized he didn't belong to this world. Given the circumstances, he would drag these otherworldly beings back to the infinite void all at once. The Corpse God's past was gradually revealed. In the previous world, the Corpse God was just a skeleton, and was controlled to destroy his closest friend with his own hands. Even so, that person never hated the corpse god. Even as a soul, he still smiled brightly and helped the corpse god dispose of his body, teasing him. But the corpse god couldn't smile. After all, a skeleton's smile couldn't be seen. Back to the life and death battle. The corpse god prepared to go all out to teach the delusional young man before him a lesson. Finally, Takumi couldn't ignore his teammate's arrogant statement. Takumi connected to the loudspeakers of the entire city and began to lecture the corpse god. Initially, when he saw the corpse god's power, he was truly afraid. However, the corpse god had also taught him and Misaki the true meaning of friendship. Takumi wouldn't allow the corpse god to vanish from their base without saying goodbye. He even thoughtfully cut off all electricity and cameras in the entire city so the corpse god could confidently demonstrate his power. Cyber had intended to clear out the corpse god's entire group first, but of course, he had to step over the protagonist's corpse first. The corpse god threw down 2 handfuls of precious stones to exchange for enough magical power to summon 3 6-headed monsters. Thanks to Takumi's enlightenment, the corpse god began to desire to fight for himself and his teammates. Cyber had to face 3 fierce beasts at once. After a period of combat, unfortunate victims began to appear around them. Cyber believed that even without security cameras recording, with such a massive number of deaths, how could it be hidden? However, the corpse god had moved all the people in the area elsewhere. Cyber had fallen into a huge trap as he was standing on the corpse god's territory. Now the corpse god could freely use his power without worrying about innocent civilians being implicated. The protagonist's dragon began to breathe fire into the face of the mage Cyber. Cagis's group had blocked all forces that could affect the protagonist's battle. Cyber wasn't an easy enemy. With just one technique, he had cut the dragon into pieces. At this point, the corpse god decided to summon the soul of his close friend whom he had sent to heaven in the previous world. This ritual took longer than he had expected. Cyber realized that the corpse god's close friend was none other than the Empire's emperor. Cyber couldn't believe his eyes because, according to what he knew, the corpse god was the person who had assassinated the Empire's emperor. Not only the emperor but the strongest members of the Empire had also made pacts with the corpse god before they died. Now the all-out war between a genius and the protagonist's entire allied force began. Sawlight and the fire-spitting bug, standing not far away, were also discussing what they should do. The fire-spitting bug had intended to burn the entire city along with the mages to eliminate future troubles. Suzuka's soul had appeared to plead with the fire-spitting bug, "Let my benefactor resolve this matter." In Iwanome's group, he was also trying to persuade the fire-spitting bug. Even if he was burned as a warning, Iwanome wanted the fire-spitting bug to release the innocent people he was manipulating. His Team 3 would deal with Sabraman's illegitimate children for him. Iwanome was ready to let the fire-spitting bug transfer his consciousness into him to monitor. The battle between the 2 women over the real Shino had also reached a critical point. Lulu couldn't understand why this mentally disturbed girl was so reckless to reclaim a stuffed animal. Misaki charged forward but was cut in half by a signboard. Fortunately, thanks to the blood-sucking demon's ability, she was still unharmed. The delicate girl was very shocked, and Lulu's spirit had separated all the rocks and soil around to prevent Misaki from advancing. In a moment of inattention, Shark Shino had escaped on his own and jumped into the sky for Misaki to catch. Lemon had somehow sneaked in to fight alongside Zio-Do. After dodging Lemon's punch, Sora immediately recognized this calamity. Sora had mustered her strength to prepare for an all-out battle with the mummy. Zio-Do had acted first with his new ability, easily knocking her through the building opposite. Now only the battle between the 2 final bosses remained. After everything, Zio-Do had also cast aside his selfishness and rushed to support Misaki in rescuing the real Shino. As soon as he arrived, Misaki threw him the hovering Shino to hold. Suddenly, a truck was projected at their faces by the spirit. Somehow, Misaki had transformed the entire truck into drops. Even Misaki herself was surprised by her top-tier ability. Zio-Do was admiring it, but he didn't know that a stone was also falling on his head. Fortunately, an expert had used chains to shatter the stone and save him. The spirit had been subdued by an old lady. She was also very happy to meet her grandchildren here. The person who had saved Zio-Do was Bravo, and she had also temporarily called a truce with Maria. Cyber was also surprised that the spirit had been controlled by someone. Now he had to deal with the mess he had created himself. The more techniques the corpse god faced against Cyber, the more he found him similar to Arius. Not just similar, but even Arius's familiar techniques could be used by him. The spirit in Cyber's words had been restrained. Well, he would just use the technique Arius had left to fight the corpse god. But this time, the person fighting him wasn't him, but his super close friend. Against the Great Emperor, Cyber's techniques were just mosquitoes. The battle ended, and the fire-spitting bug's hatred had been set aside. On Cyber's side, no one was injured, but they were no less battered. Just that the battle had ended without casualties. Cyber also felt this world had some purpose to live for.